Parents, what are your I looked away for 1 second stories? I was round at my buddy's place. He had kids about 7 and 5, both super nice kids and nice family. We were sitting in the garden with a beer. The eldest had a foam covered baseball that he'd been hitting foam balls with. Out of nowhere, he calmly walks up behind his dad and takes a full home run swing at his head. Effing clobbers him. This bat is coated in foam, but it's still wood beneath it, so it's basically mid-level assault, maybe attempted murder. Dazed, the dad turns round to defend himself, at which point the 5-year-old sees his opportunity and grabs the beer from the table and starts chugging it. Not just drinking it, full-on frat boy chugging it out of nowhere. In the 3 seconds it takes me to recover from the shock and reach across the table to stop him, the kids drank about 2/3 of the bottle. Not much for an adult, but a effing skinful for a kid weighing about 1 stone. Within about 3 seconds, we went from nice family barbecue to concussed adult, domestically abused by a psychopathic 7-year-old and a wasted 5-year-old. Went real dark, real quick. Story 2. Not me, but my wife. Our 2 younger kids are 14 months apart. When our daughter was around 3 and our son was 2, my wife went into the garage to grab a frozen pizza out of the deep freezer, and one of the kids, not sure which one, shut the door and locked my wife in the garage. She was banging on the door and could hear the little boogers in there laughing at her. My wife was not amused. She got a flathead screwdriver from my toolbox and managed to unlock the door. This all took 15 minutes or so. When she got in the house, they were in their room watching cartoons and eating cookies they managed to steal. They would have left her out there all night. It's funny now, 10 years later, but my wife was scared crapless. We've kept a spare key hidden in the garage ever since. Yeah, that's something, I don't even know if I'd laugh about it 10 years later. That could have ended so poorly. Glad that it didn't, though, and now you've got a key in there, so if those troublemakers try to pull another fast one on mom, she's got a quick way out. Story 3. Our firstborn was about 18 months, walking, but not that agile. I was downstairs on the computer. Wife yelled down she was using the bathroom and for me to watch him. We misunderstood each other, so he was alone for about 3 minutes. She comes out asking where he is, and he's nowhere to be found in the house. Thinking he's just hiding, we start a full search, only to notice the back patio door is slightly open after a few minutes hunting. Growing concern at this point, but figuring he just snuck out back. A full search of the fenced and gated yard shows nothing. Now the heartbeat is going. Start running out and down the street. Find him 2 blocks down. He was heading to the park, which would have required crossing 2 roads, one of which was a busy one. Nice neighbors found him and were walking him home as they'd recognized us from previous walks. Years later, the little neighbor girl would remind us how he, quote, saved his life. Needless to say, child locks went on all the doors in the house after that. Story 4. I had just moved into a new neighborhood on a cul-de-sac with my 2 young daughters, ages 5 and 2. I walked out to the community mailbox to grab my mail and met my next-door neighbor while I was there. We chatted for a couple minutes when I heard my older daughter yelling from the front door, "Hey Dad, younger daughter, YD, is naked!" I look over at my house and YD is standing at the end of the driveway as naked as the day she was born. I locked eyes with YD and with a laugh, she turned around and started bolting the opposite way from me up the street. I quickly said goodbye to the neighbor, tucked my mail under my arm, and started chasing her down the block. I ended up scooping her up with my other free arm a block later while she was laughing her head off. All the other neighbors got a good laugh seeing me chase her down. Couldn't get mad at her as it was so funny, and was impressed she could get undressed so fast. Story 5. TLDR. Infant son rolled off the couch, cracked his skull, and had to have brain surgery. I had just finished changing my 6-month-old son's diaper, with him lying on the couch with a changing cloth underneath. I turned to throw the diaper in the trash right next to the couch, and in the 2 seconds I didn't have my hands on him, he rolled off the couch. He'd never even rolled over before. He hit the ottoman, which spun him back the other way, and he smacked his head on the hardwood floor. He cried, but calmed down after a few minutes. There was no sign of swelling, no blood, etc. We were worried about a possible concussion, so we kept a close eye on him the rest of the day. When it was time for us to go to bed, we decided to stay up and watch a movie instead, and I went in and checked on him partway through the movie while my, now ex-wife, went to make some popcorn. I changed his diaper and he woke up a little. One of his pupils was overdilated, and the side of his face had started to droop like he was having a stroke. We immediately grabbed our diaper bag, jumped in the car, and drove to the hospital, which fortunately was only 10 minutes away. I walked into the ER carrying my son and told the nurse that I thought he was having a stroke. She checked him, took us to a back room, and within minutes the room was swarming with medical personnel. A doctor informed us that it looked like our son had cracked his skull internally, and there was swelling in the brain. They would need to perform open cranial surgery immediately to relieve the pressure on the brain. The doctor told us that they weren't sure he would survive the surgery, but it was his best option. We were whisked into another room, separated, and asked questions about exactly how the injury had happened. They wanted to make sure it wasn't due to abuse because they said that falling off the couch onto the floor shouldn't have had the force to crack an infant's skull. At this point, his mom and I were both sobbing, just trying to figure out what was going on and whether our son was going to be okay. When they finally finished interviewing us, they brought us into a waiting room. I called my parents to tell them what was happening, and then another doctor came to tell us that the surgery had gone well, but that they had to remove around 2/3 of his brain tissue due to the blood saturation damage. He showed us an X-ray or MRI they had done just before actually began cutting that showed what looked like a crescent moon of gray matter clinging to the left edge of the interior of the skull, with the rest of the image filled by blackness, which the doctor told us was blood. He advised us that even if he survived the rest of the night, our son would likely never learn to walk or talk. When the surgery was done, they brought him to us. He was still groggy from the anesthesia, but other than being very understandably fussy, he seemed otherwise like his normal self. Of course, there was also a large incision wound, stitches, and tubes coming out of his head to drain off the excess fluid. It was around 2 a.m. at this point, but I called our religious leader, who I was also good friends with, to tell him about the situation. He came and prayed with us, and offered a blessing for our son, just that he would make it through the night. This story is already getting much longer than I want to type on a Reddit comment, but he survived the night. He survived the next week and the next month, and every time the doctor saw him, they said it was a miracle that he was alive. He had mild seizures for a few months after the operation, and when he first started to crawl, he would sometimes just stop and freeze for a second or two for no apparent reason. But remarkably, the 1/3 of his brain matter that they'd left grew to fill the rest of his brain cavity. The blood vessels from the left side of his brain spread and grew all the way across to cover the right side where the original vessels had been destroyed. He learned to talk and walk within the regular time frames and had no noticeable residual effects of his traumatic injury. When we took him back to the hospital 6 months later for his final post-op checkup, every one of the nurses said it was a miracle that he was even alive, much less talking and moving around like a normal 1-year-old. This is an absolutely awesome and wholesome story that I just want to take a second to highlight. Miracles can happen. So happy for the child in this family that it wasn't as severe as it seemed in the moment. What an awesome feel-good story. Story 6. I'll tell one on my mother's behalf. When I was 3 or so, we lived in an apartment with an arched set of monkey bars out back. A standard rule was that I shouldn't play on them when she wasn't around to supervise. Well, one day I was playing on them when the phone rang, so she ran inside to answer it, but not before ensuring that I'd gotten off the monkey bars and repeating her usual warning. One of the things she never allowed was for me to try and walk atop said monkey bars, and already being primed to play on them, I seized the opportunity. I made it to about the middle before I lost my balance and fell through the bars, wanging my head on them as I passed and then landing more or less head first on the hard, packed dirt. Had a stutter for years after that, and I suspect the process of getting over that is why I don't speak as if I grew up where I actually did. This was one of many, many times that I got hurt the instant I chose to disregard her warnings. Also included are the time I crushed my finger in a dumpster, the warning being to come and get her should I find the lid closed. My sister and I judged that she could toss it open and I could just time throwing the trash inside. We were mistaken. The time I was impaled on a tree, I was told to not climb cedar trees, especially the one that I climbed and then promptly slipped out of, only to be helpfully caught by a branch through the groin on the way down. A number of bicycle wrecks and pseudo-fencing accidents, and, well, you get the idea. Okay, OP, how are you still alive? I mean, it sounds like you've had some more than just accidents. I mean, these are like some pretty gruesome things. Impaled through the groin and falling through monkey bars and landing directly on your head. Like, what in the world? You need to be in a human bubble or something. Story 7. Not a parent, but when I worked childcare, I lost a child. We didn't have enough workers scheduled, just me and one other for an event. The policies for the place were horrible, and for this event, we had to accept any kids that parents wanted to drop off. So we had about 20 kids, around 12 toddlers, 4 kids who were too old to be in the nursery, 4 to 6 years old, and 4 infants. Well, we should have been in the same room as we only had 2 workers, but we knew the toddlers would end up hurting the infants if we did that. So we split up. I had the 16 kids, the other worker had the 4 infants. One of the toddlers had to use the restroom, attached. He went on his own, and after he needed help buttoning his pants again. So I turned my back to the room, fixed his pants, directed him to the sink to wash his hands, and then turned back into the room. I immediately performed a head count and realized I was off by 1. So I counted again, and again. Then I started frantically checking the closet and mentally figured out who I was missing. I was freaking out. Told the other worker and they're freaking out. We don't know where the kid is. Mentally, I'm thinking I have to call the cops now, and it's going to be a huge deal. The other worker calls the church's pastor, it's a church event, and they call the child's parents. They had picked up their child. In the 10 seconds I had my back turned, the child's father had walked up to the half door. The child saw him and ran to the door, and he just picked them up and walked away. Didn't sign the sign-out sheet. Didn't see an adult, didn't do anything but walk up and carry their kid away. We were absolutely pissed, and now that I'm older, I wouldn't work an event like that, or I'd turn away kids once we got to the point we couldn't take care of them. I wouldn't be in that situation again. Story 8. Bro, my 5-year-old had a drawer of plastic cups that were always accessible to him. He'd get a cup, fill it at the sink, and get a drink of water whenever he wanted. It was great. He had been doing it since he was 3. Anyway, one day he decided he wanted a glass of water. So we're eating breakfast. I get up to pee. I was away for literally a second. He pulled out a chair. He moved the chair to the kitchen counter. He climbed the chair. He used the shelves as grips and foot supports to climb up to the glasses. I came out of the bathroom. I walked back into the kitchen the moment that the top shelf broke. He fell backward. I dove backward. I caught my son mid-air moments before his back landed in a pile of shattered pint glasses. My forearms, hands, and wrists were all embedded with broken glass. Ironically, he literally put the chair directly in front of his little drawer full of child safe cups. The glasses that were broken were among some of my prized possessions. So many unique pint glasses from Disney World, ski resorts, out-of-the-way American towns, the super cool ones that had been stolen from countless bars, grills, and restaurants. My wife has a compulsion, and even my PBR pint glass that my grandpa gave me. He stole it, too. Anyway, it was quite a day. Story 9. Not mine, but my mom's. She tells me this one all the time. I was 3, and my mom and I are at the mall doing some Christmas shopping. We were in a clothing store looking at some clothes. My mom looked away for 1 second, and when she turned around, I was gone. Nowhere to be found in the store. Security was called in, and it took, I think, 2 hours for them to find me. I kept going on to different stores, looking at stuff, then immediately leaving. Stores kept calling security to tell them where I was. I was really fast and slippery back then, so I was able to get away quickly. In the end, they eventually caught me, and I was only gone to do my own Christmas shopping. According to my mom, she said these exact words after reuniting with me. We're going to end up on the news. I was extremely fast and slippery when I was really younger. Not so much now. I can only run for so long before getting tired and exhausted. My toddler self, however, unlimited amounts of energy. Never doing that again. Story 10. Not a parent, but family was sitting in the living room with the TV on. I was like 7, sister was 3 or 4. She had found a golf ball somewhere, still to this day don't know where it came from, and was throwing it at me over and over again. Of course, I asked her to stop, but she found it so amusing that my words didn't quite sink in. My dad intervenes, asks her to not throw golf balls at her sister, and she stops. Everyone is calm for about 2 minutes. I look up, and my sister full-on hurls the golf ball into the TV at Mach speed for someone half her size. I screamed. The TV fell backwards into the wall, off off the cabinet it was set up on, and I got the beating of a lifetime because my mom was thoroughly convinced by my sister's finger pointing and crying that I was the culprit. There was a gaping hole in the TV. The whole screen was shattered, and we couldn't buy a new one for months because we didn't have the money to spare. Story 11. Another one speaking on behalf of my mom, since she'd never touch Reddit. I was around 7, I think, definitely old enough to know better. We were at Walmart, and I asked my mom if I could ride in the cart because I was tired. She said, yeah, but hang on, so she could put her purse in the seat and get her list out. My dumbass was too impatient to hang on, so I tried to climb in the cart myself while she was turned around grabbing some coupons. I flipped over the cart and fell headfirst inside of it, cracking my head open. I started bleeding everywhere. I don't even remember it hurting. I was just in shock because of how my mom was reacting. There was a Subway at the entrance where it happened, and an employee noticed what happened and rushed over to offer a bag of ice. This also caught the attention of a Walmart manager standing up front, and she was extremely worried that we were going to file a lawsuit. My mom was like, why would I do that? She ended up having to take me to the hospital to get my wound glued together in butterfly bandages. It honestly wasn't that bad of a wound. It just bled a lot because head wounds usually do. But 20 years later, and I still have a scar a little over an inch long going into my hairline. Story 12. Oh God. Here's where I get to tell the story about how I nearly caused my son to choke to death. I'm a relatively new dad. Son is now 14 months old, and about a week before his birthday, Mom was sleeping after working the night shift, and so it was just us men for the day. Time came for me to change him, and he's gotten into the habit of rolling over once his diaper's off so he can crawl away. As a way to negate this, we usually give him a ball or something to keep him busy. Well, the only thing I had close by was an Xbox controller. He's played with the controllers before. He likes to flick the thumbsticks and press the buttons, no big deal. I didn't realize I gave him the Xbox Elite controller. If you don't know what the difference between the two is, the only relevant thing to the story is that on the Elite controller, you have the option to swap out thumbsticks since they're magnetic. Anyways, he's playing just fine with it as I start to take off his pants and then take off his diaper. After I remove the dirty diaper, I've got his feet in one hand and the diaper in the other as I rotate my torso to put the dirty one aside, and as I turn back around, I see him with a closed mouth looking awfully suspicious. That's when I notice, not one, but both thumbsticks are missing from the controller, still in his hands. I begin to panic. I loudly yell, "No!" Then reach into his mouth and scoop out both thumbsticks. It's at this time that he begins to cry. "I don't care, I just saved your life, dude," is how I felt. He begins to throw a tantrum, and in the throes of passion, he kicks the old diaper off the blanket I laid on the couch and onto the floor, like a slice of buttered toast. The diaper lands frosting side down. I still have to get him into a clean diaper and put his pants back on him before I attend to the other issue. I end up taking care of both issues, break out the trusty carpet cleaner, and lay him down for a nap, never to speak of what just happened to my wife, ever. It was like 2 days later when he did the same thing, with the same controller, sans poop on the rug, when I heard her yell. I proceed to run into the living room to ask what happened. She tells me, and I calmly said to her, "Babe, this is why you can't look away when he's got small stuff in his hands." But yeah, I almost let my kid choke to death a few days before his first birthday. Story 13. I'm not a parent, but this story is about me when I was little. I feel I can probably tell it since I still remember this happening, even though I'd say I was probably around 3 at the time. So I have an older brother who's 2 years older than me, and before I was in school, Mom used to walk us down to the school together, since it was just around the corner and she couldn't leave me at home. It's barely 100 meters, but you did have to cross one busy-ish street. Anyway, so while I'm sure she would argue it was only a few seconds, it was a solid few minutes, and my brother and I were content to just book it so that we could get on with our day, which is what we did. From our house, there was one left turn, and you were facing the school. You just had to go down the hill and cross the road. We had a nice chat about how cool it would be to have a car to drive down to the school so that we didn't have to walk every day. And then, when we got to the bottom of the hill and were about to cross the road, our mom screamed from the top of the hill and told us to stay put until she got there. We were still considering crossing the road, but our better judgment was to listen to Mom so we didn't get in trouble. Apparently, we also used the correct ingredients one time to try and make a cake, which had the eggshells left in it and smeared crap all over the walls to paint with. I don't remember those, but they sound like fun times. Story 14. I just put together a new bunk bed for the kids because they wanted to share a room now that the youngest was almost ready to move out of our room, as he's a little over a year old. So I leave the youngest to play on the ground while the oldest is putting his stuff on his top bunk bed because it has a shelf for his things. I went to the bathroom and came back to find the youngest had climbed the bunk bed by himself and went up to the top while the oldest had went downstairs to get more of his favorite toys to litter his new bed with. I try to get him to come down, but he scampers away, and I can't get him because he's a twin bed away from me and almost at eye height. I had to have my other kid shove him forward enough for me to grab him. I didn't even think it would be possible for him to climb the bunk bed, but he came up with a solution for himself that involved climbing halfway up, then standing on the dresser for a break, then climbing up the rest of the way. He would still climb up by himself when I wasn't watching, and I would often catch him, which would scare me every time. It got to be that he just had to ask to go up there, so I would lift him up, but that was too slow. Now, 2 years later, he just climbs the side of the bed because he doesn't want to walk to the side of the bed to get to the ladder. He stands on his bottom bunk and reaches up to the bottom of the top bunk and just does like 3 pull-ups over the safety railing to get over the top. To understand how much of a handful this kid is, just look at this picture a day after he broke his arm. Story 15. Oh boy, do I have a story for you. 2 days ago, I had to go to the bathroom. My wife was at work, so it was just me and my son. I take 5 minutes to do a number 2. My son is 2 years old and had shown himself to be more than capable of being in another room without a parent before. I come out of the bathroom and his hands and butt are covered in crap. There's poo on the carpet and the kitchen floor and on his toys. It's literally everywhere. He looks at me and says, "Need diaper." I had to bathe him and put him down for a nap while the rest of the house festered. I needed him out of the way while I deep cleaned everything. Mercifully, he completely missed our new couches, but I spent 2 hours shampooing the floor, mopping, and scrubbing his toys with disinfectant. It was a painful morning. Based on the evidence he left behind, I was able to piece together how it all happened. He has a habit of jumping off his toddler chairs to practice landing on his feet, and most of the poo was on a ball he plays with. I think he jumped off a chair with a full diaper and landed on the ball, which caused the poo explosion. Then, wondering what happened, he wiped his hands on his butt and got poo on them. He then went about his life as usual till I came out. Think about your sanity before deciding on becoming a parent. I mean, I love how this 2-year-old at least had the wherewithal to say, "Hey, Dad, I think I might need a diaper," as you're just covered in fecal matter. Smart kid. I like that. Story 16. We had just moved into a new neighborhood, and I was unpacking the kitchen so we could eat. My husband was unpacking the tools and the carpet and took our 3-year-old outside with him to give me a break from the whining. The next thing we know, there are 2 women on our doorstep holding our crying child, and the other woman was calling the police. Our daughter had wandered over to the playground 2 houses down and found an adult like she had been told if she got lost and was crying, "Mommy, Daddy," except Daddy sounded like dying at the time. We had to deal with the cops on our first day in the neighborhood. What a great introduction. Ugh. Although, 2 years later, I was out running at 11 p.m. and heard crying. I looked and saw a toddler running out of the cul-de-sac near me. I picked up the toddler and found the first yard with toys and went to knock on the door. I saw through the screen door there was a guy doing dishes with his back to the door. I knocked, he looked, turned ghostly white, and rushed to the door. He hadn't realized that his toddler could just barely reach the screen door handle. Kids are sneaky. Story 17. Not a parent, but my mom loves to narrate this story whenever she gets the chance. I was maybe 4 years old when we had this huge glass coffee table in our living room. I really liked hanging around it since it was new and shiny and stuff. The glass slab on the table was mounted on these suction cups. So one fine afternoon, Mom sipping her drink, reading some book, and I was apparently bored. Somebody rang the doorbell, so she went to the door and I was suddenly alone in the room. For some reason, I decided to lift one edge of the glass slab off the table, and the suction cup made the best sound you could imagine. I hope you get what kind of sound I'm talking about, lol. So there are maybe 6 suction cups on the edge of the glass slab, and I keep lifting the glass higher and higher until one suction cup is keeping the glass slab from falling over. So I said to myself, hey, I know what to do, and decided to slide the huge-ass glass slab on the tiled floor. Huge huge mistake. About half of the room's floor was just covered in broken glass, and I had to stand awkwardly in the same place for a long time until the whole area was cleaned. My mom was just grateful I was alive after this. LOL. Story 18. Okay, so we were all gonna watch a movie before bed. It was January, and the Christmas tree just got put up a week ago. My toddler ran out of the bedroom, and I was talking to my wife and grabbing our water bottles to fill up. I went to fill those and grab him, and he's sitting by the couch just crunching away on something. I thought he might have just hid some crackers or a piece of bread under the couch. I go to grab him and see what he has. It's the metal end of an ornament, a glass Christmas ornament. So I panic, and I flip him upside down. I'm trying to scrape glass out of his mouth and trying not to let him swallow any more, yelling for her to call the ER. Literally losing my crap because all I can think about is my son's intestines getting torn to shreds and I'm dying. ER says nothing they can do since it's glass and to call the children's clinic. Clinic says to get stool softener and watch for blood. So I run to get him stool softener. Don't sleep the entire night and just check his color and breathing every 5 seconds. Luckily he was fine and he ate that entire ornament. His diapers looked like someone crushed a disco ball in mud, all full of blue shards of glass and glitter. Very festive. Luckily, he's fine. 0 issues at all. Story 19. My dad and I took my son to a baseball game when he was about 5. We had a great time, and my son was really excited afterwards as we were walking across the bridge to the parking lot. He started running ahead, and for a split second, he was out of my line of sight. Then he was just gone. We get across the bridge, and he's nowhere to be seen. I started feeling sick, realizing how easy it would have been for someone to grab him and drive off with him. I also worry he couldn't have fallen off the bridge and run to look in the water. I start crying and calling for him. Thankfully, some kind people offer to help me look and notify the police. I look every place I can think of, and he's just not there. By now, most people have left, and I'm feeling absolute dread. Finally, I hear from the police that they've located a boy matching his description. It's him. They'd found him back at the stadium, a long way in the opposite direction we'd been going. I still have no idea how he ended up there, and he didn't even know, but I'm just glad he's safe and unharmed. It was a huge lesson about how lost a kid can get in so little time. It made me really feel for parents of missing kids who talked about just losing sight of them for a second. Story 20. Picture it. 8 months pregnant mom, 2.5-year-old toddler that gives no craps. We're in a huge store that I had never been before, in a town I've only been a few times. I'm on the toilet, and the toddler slides under the stall. I'm thinking, well, at least she can't open the heavy door outside, as someone else opens the door and lets her escape. So there's me with my huge stomach, barely able to move as it is, waddling out of the bathroom midstream, having my maternity pants up. My eyes are darting back and forth, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone that's only 2 feet. I think at this point someone noticed my panic because they pointed towards the back of the store. I'm thinking, God, she headed that way and not out of the double doors just a few feet away. I'm still waddling my ass as fast as it would let me go, barely gaining on her, but I at least now had my eyes on her. And then, out of nowhere, this terrifying guy grabs her. I'm talking missing teeth, long scraggly hair, those cloudy blue eyes that I feel like he really couldn't even see out of. Someone that would have fit right in working on the Black Pearl with Captain Jack Sparrow. So now my heart's beating even faster, thinking I'm now going to have to fight off this pirate who grabbed my baby. I get just a few feet away and he's saying, "You better not run from your mom anymore or someone like me is going to come and take you away forever." And he flashes her his gnarled grin, laughing as loud and creepy as he could, while she's screaming and struggling against him. She already hated all men to begin with, so this just added to her hatred. He held on to her until he could hand her off directly to me as he winked and whispered, "I got you covered, mama." I gave her a stern talking to, holding her as tight as possible, thinking of all the different ways this could have played out. But she never again left my sight after this, and still brings it up to this day as, "Remember the time I ran from you and that scary guy almost got me? I'll never run from you again." Edited to add, when her brother was old enough to walk, you better believe his ass was leashed. I don't even want to think about the heart-stopping moments he would have put me through otherwise. Story 21. More like a stepped out for 1 second story. Daughter was 2.5 at the time. My neighbor came by for just a moment and I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Literally just 1 second to give me some samples. Then I heard the dreaded click. Daughter had locked me out. Let me also mention that she was the type of child that would get into crap the moment she could get away with it. Ensue panic. Emergency maintenance wasn't getting back to me. The apartment office was long closed. I could occasionally see her through the window between the blinds, and I was begging her to unlock the door, but she couldn't figure it out. Then I lost sight of her for too long, and I just knew she was into something she shouldn't be. A neighbor finally ran over, and we managed to knock loose the window locks, and I slid inside. She was in the kitchen feeding my dog an entire tub of sour cream and shredded cheese. The fridge was massacred, and she just looked at me with a crap-eating grin. I ended up laughing/crying and made sure to always have my keys on me after that. Lesson learned. Story 22. My 4-year-old, 3 at the time, is a wild boy. If he can get into it, he wants to hold it, inspect it, and see how it operates. At the time, I had him running about, and his baby brother was crying bloody murder for a bottle. I'm rushing to make the bottle, corral the toddler, and comfort him at the exact same time. I lay the baby down with his bottle. He gets to eating and immediately calms down. At the exact second he goes silent and I turn to check on my toddler, who was just sitting next to me shushing the baby, I heard glass shatter. I took off running towards the laundry room, and my toddler was standing on top of the washing machine and had somehow managed to knock the glass from the light fixture. I freaked out, snatched him down immediately while dodging glass, and he was going, wow. And that's when I noticed the blood. Just a little cut on his finger, and it was just barely at the point to really warrant stitches. But when it's your baby and it's their first time ever having any real injury, it's horrifying. He wasn't even concerned about it one bit until I noticed. But that's my experience with getting gashes like that too. You just don't feel it at first. I was so horrified and felt that I was the worst mom ever, even though it only took like 6 seconds max. He got 4 little stitches, we kept it clean, bandaged daily, and he got a toy for handling it so well. He's a little speech delayed, but his vocabulary is exploding constantly, OMG. And it was the first time he was able to really voice the fact that it hurt, and it was scary, which was so heartbreaking. He handled it so well. However, it seems like he's accident-prone like me, who manages to end up in the hospital from some injury every single year, it seems like. God help him, lol. Story 23. Obligatory not a parent, but both my sister and mother have had these moments. My sister once turned her head for 2 seconds to grab a wipe while changing my niece's nappy, only for her to decide that was the perfect moment to roll for the first time. She looked back to see the baby roll right off the edge of the table, fall 3 feet onto the floor, and crack her head off the nappy bin in the process. My niece is 12 now, and she still has a tiny mark on her head where her soft skull was permanently dented. She was fine, luckily. My sister was hysterical, but the baby was fine, and luckily we had a pediatrician next door neighbor who was able to check the damage immediately. 15 years prior to that, my mother was in the kitchen preparing leftover roast chicken for sandwiches one day when she turned around to grab some salt. My little sister, who was about 3 at the time, pulled a kitchen chair up to the countertop to try and grab some and slipped. She hit her face and her lips started bleeding and she started crying. So my mom turned around in a panic and picked her up and lifted her onto the counter to check if she was okay. Deciding it was just a cut lip and no serious damage had been done, she calmed the child down and went to go get some antiseptic wipes when suddenly she heard a bang and screaming. Little sister had used the opportunity of being left alone to make a second attempt at grabbing the chicken, had slipped off the bench and cracked her face off the back of the chair. She was okay, but she had a huge black eye for weeks, and my mother was mortified going out in public with a toddler who looked like she had been in 3 rounds with Mike Tyson. Yeah, it's always tricky, like when a child sustains an injury like that, taking them out in public, I think like instinctively people just think that like the child's being abused. So it's like, it's so awkward and uncomfortable, but you know, you just got to do the best you can. And at least the child's okay. That's the most important thing. Story 24. It was about a year ago when my son was 3. We had just got back from his swim class, so I was in the process of putting him in the shower. I got him undressed, put him in the shower, and turned to go grab a towel from the closet. Couldn't have been 2 seconds, and I heard a loud smack. I turned and saw that he had fallen, but no tears yet, just kind of looking in shock at me. I go to check that he's okay, and I see blood pouring from his mouth. I'm thinking he busted his lip, then I pull his lip back to see if it requires stitches. I see 2 of his teeth are missing. I look down and to my horror see 2 teeth laying in the shower, root and all. I freak out and yell for my wife, who's a nurse, while also trying to console him as now he's screaming. I wrap my towel around him and pick him up, all while blood is just pouring out of his mouth. I carry him to meet my wife in our bedroom, and she just looks horrified. We both were covered in blood. She remains calm as a nurse would and calls our pediatrician to see what, if anything, we need to do. She got a hold of our dentist, and turns out this happens a lot, and luckily he didn't need surgery since both teeth came out, root and all. We took him in for x-rays the next day. After, he was calmed down and stopped breaking my heart by saying, "My teeth are gone," while sobbing. I climbed into the shower to rinse off all the blood. Cried so hard as I felt it was my fault for looking away for 2 seconds. I can find the pictures of the incident, but here is one after everything is healed. Also forgot to mention, we had just had another son about 4 weeks prior to this going down. Fun times. Story 25. We had just gotten to my grandparents' house several years ago when my oldest son was 2, and my daughter was like 3 months old. My daughter was asleep in her carrier when I got there, and no one was home yet. My son was watching TV, and I took my daughter's carrier into the bathroom where I could see her while I used the restroom. A few moments later, I hear my grandfather's old-ass Cocker Spaniel bark. But this dog effing never barks. So I grab my daughter out of her carrier and go to see what's up. I find the front door open and my son isn't watching TV. I run outside holding my infant daughter and see the front gate open and the other 2 dogs in the side yard, separated by another fence, staring down the road. I make it to the street and there's my damn toddler sprinting towards the main street. Effing fat guy sprinting down the street, carrying my infant daughter, trying not to give her shaking baby syndrome, while also screaming at my son at the top of my lungs to get him to stop. Thankfully, he heard me and turned around and ran back to me, crying and terrified. I'm guessing he thought he had been left at home alone and went looking for me. I would have caught him by the time he made it to the street, but holy crap did it scare me. Not gonna lie, it's really humbling to know I owe my boy's safety to a sweet old decrepit Cocker Spaniel who let out a bark when I had never heard a peep from her. Story 26. Both me and my younger sibling have some stories like that. My mom is the calm one, my dad not so much. As a very young child, barely 2 or so, my grandma went to the kitchen and when she came back, I was jumping back and forth between 2 couches over a fairly large glass table. I could have missed a jump and fallen right into that glass, lol. Grandparents' house was not very childproof. I was a very adventurous child, always running off, trying to pet dogs, and climbing onto any possible structure. Trees, walls, fences, roofs, you name it. This led to an incalculable amount of times where my parents turned away for a second and lost me for a while in public spaces. It would be too long to list them all, but honestly, it's a miracle they didn't end up leashing me after the 3rd or 4th time. My dad left me unsupervised on a rocking horse at age 3 for less than a minute. Came back to me having cut my eyebrow open from hitting my head on the horse for rocking too hard. Almost fainted on the spot as he thought I'd lost my eye. It was fine. My sibling hit her head on a ceiling while using a swing and it bled a lot. Dad freaked out that time too. Sibling, as a toddler, stepped outside of the terrace barefoot, stepped immediately on a bee and got stung. By the time her crying alerted my parents, who were inside, I was already using my mom's tweezers to remove the stinger from her sole. She couldn't wear a shoe on that foot for a few days after because it was very swollen. Sibling and I were playing next to a pool while parents were playing tennis nearby. They could see us from the field. We were around 7 and 4 years old. She had been instructed not to go to the edge of the pool and not to leave my side. Obviously, she took off running to the edge with a toy, slipped on the wet floor, and fell right into the deep end of the pool. I remember that I knew immediately how dangerous it was and that she couldn't swim without floaters, so I dropped everything, jumped into the pool fully clothed, and managed to pull her out and away from it. My mom immediately realized what happened and came running to give us towels and hugs. Sibling, at around age 5, once decided that she would start an impromptu game of hide and seek with the whole family during a trip to an IKEA store. It took nearly an hour and the whole security looking to find her hiding inside a dresser. She was very proud of having won that game, but my mom wasn't. I have many stories. It's a miracle me and my siblings survived to adulthood. Story 27. Not my kid, but once in Maui, a boy got lost on the beach for about an hour. It was honestly a bit traumatizing. We were relaxing in this black sand cove with very choppy waters, man-o-war warnings everywhere, steep, sharp cliff edges, and a rainforest behind the sand. It was pretty, but not a very safe beach. A while into it, we notice a father, mother, and daughter scrambling around, practically crying, looking for their 3-year-old son. The whole beach sprung into action. The waters were dangerous, but over half the the beach was out there looking. The other half searched the forest. It had been almost an hour when the parents started to give up. The dad just broke down, crying and screaming with his knees in the sand. Just the most heart-wrenching sobs, thinking his son had drowned. That moment really changed me, to be honest. About 10 minutes later, I walked to the parking lot, trying to find a place to cry where no one will see me, lol. I walk behind a line of cars, and the little boy is just sitting there, alone, nearly out of sight. I brought him back and couldn't hold the tears back when I saw his family run to him. The kid had no idea what was going on. You'd think the folks on the beach would have celebrated in some way after this ordeal, but I think we were all a bit effed up from it. The energy was pretty solemn afterwards. I think we were all replaying the father's cries in our heads. My whole family was silent in the car on the ride home. I still think about how so many people helped that day. A lot of people risked their safety in very choppy, rocky waters to find this boy. All in all, an incredibly emotional experience that I'll likely remember forever. Story 28. When my daughter was about 2, one of her favorite games was hide and seek. The problem was that she didn't tell anyone she was playing. She would just hide. But she was never very well hidden, and she usually giggled the whole time, so finding her was more of an elaborate production on my part. One day, I looked away for 1 second, probably a minute or two, and she was gone. I assumed we were playing hide and seek and started looking for her as I normally would, loudly wondering where she could be. After a couple minutes of not finding her in the usual spots and not hearing a peep out of her, I started to get this sinking feeling and just started to call out for her. Nothing. I looked everywhere, and I couldn't find her. I started to panic, and before I knew it, I was looking in places that would have been physically impossible for her to be. Still no luck. Every moment that passed was exponentially more terrifying than the last. I was left with only the conclusion that she must have gotten out of the house, so I ran outside and scanned the street as far as I could see, but I couldn't go searching because I couldn't leave my son alone. At this point, maybe 10 to 15 minutes had passed, and I was desperate. I went back inside to get my phone to call the police, and there she was, just standing there with the biggest, proudest, most adorable smile on her face. I don't think I've ever gone through an emotional ride like that one. I mean, I want a little bit more information here. Where was she? Surely she fessed up and told you where she was hiding at. Glad she's okay, of course, but man, what a cliffhanger. Story 29. My youngest was 10 months old when he started walking. Only about a week or two later, we didn't have a proper baby gate up at the top of the stairs yet, just a small puppy gate that wasn't attached. So I left him and his sister upstairs while I went to get him a juice or something. I was standing at the sink when I hear little footsteps. I assume it's Big Sis, who was 4 or 5 by then. I look up expecting to see her walk into the living room, but no one is there. I stand on tiptoes to look over and volunteer, and there's my youngest. He had toddled down 16 stairs by himself to find me. Amazon delivered 2 extra wide gates 2 days later. Another story, also my youngest. He was 2 or 3 and having a full meltdown in the car. He wanted to go back to preschool for some reason I don't recall. It was lunchtime, he was hungry, so yelling, screaming, crying the whole way home. Get home and get him inside. I close the garage door behind him and I go back to the car to grab his backpack. Then I come back in the house. I get back in the house and he's gone. He's nowhere to be found. I see the front door wide open. That little nut had gone directly for the front door, let himself out, and was already heading down the walkway towards the street. He was just going to walk himself all the way back to preschool. Again, 2 days later, Amazon delivered a heavy-duty slide bolt for the front door. I didn't have these problems with his sister, and to be honest, she was really crazy herself. Story 30. With 7.8k comments and counting, nobody's ever going to see this, but I lived on a second-floor apartment building with a balcony. It's got vertical steel rails that are like 5 to 6 feet, and 12 centimeters to 15 centimeters apart. 5 adults are standing around chatting and laughing. I look over, and my girlfriend's 2-year-old is on the wrong side of the rails, leaning back as far as she can over empty air in a cement parking lot below, shaking herself to and fro like a monkey. Inside, I'm totally losing my crap, but I don't want to startle her, so I say calmly, "Honey, you need to come back onto this side of the railing. Right now, please." All the adults stop talking, but perhaps taking a cue from my calm voice, nobody freaks out or makes any sudden moves. The part of me that isn't freaking out is wondering how the F she managed to get onto the other side of those rails without teleporting. She puts her forehead between the steel rails and starts pushing. Meanwhile, I calmly walk over and nonchalantly grab her shirt, just in case. Her head starts slowly sliding between the bars. It's clearly tight. I'm amazed it fits at all. I don't understand how she's not crying out in pain. It seems impossible she's not going to rip her ears off doing this. Is this how you got out? Yeah, she replies, as I watch this 2-year-old continue to do a fair imitation of an octopus's ability to squeeze a large body through a small opening. Long story short, she gets her head in and then contorts the rest of her body in. Amazeballs. Fast forward 6 months for self-unalive attempt number 2. This little girl's a fish and would happily stay in the pool 24/7. It's just her and me, and it's getting dark and cool. I didn't feel like swimming yet again. She's perfectly capable of swimming around with her floaties, so she's in the pool by herself. Time to go in, I say, and ignoring her desperate pleas to not quit yet, I haul her out of the pool and take off her floaties. Let's go inside. I'm walking and she's sulking, walking a little slower and thus behind me, which is okay. Suddenly, I hear a large splash in the hot tub. I turn to look, and sure enough, there she is, in the hot tub, no water wings, just sitting there underwater. Oh, no you didn't, I think as I run over. Your mother is out having a nice time with a few friends, and she is not going to come home and find out I killed her child. You are not going to do this to me. I get to the edge of the hot tub and can plainly see I can't reach her from the edge. So, fully clothed, I step into the hot tub and haul her out. Fortunately, she was used to jumping into the pool with her floaties and was holding her breath. Surprised she hadn't immediately bobbed to the surface like every time before, but perfectly unharmed. Later that night, hey, remember when your little girl tried to do a backflip off the balcony? Story 31. My dad asked me to put this here, so apparently I was like 2, and since this was when my parents were broken up, he only had me for the day. He was making dinner for me and him and happened to throw away a can of something. I was in my high chair and the garbage can was about 3 to 4 feet from me. He says he guessed his initial thought was that the high chair was a good foot taller than the garbage can, so I can't possibly dig through it. Wrong. He turns back around to pull the food off the stove, and as he does, he hears something like metal dropping. He turns towards me, thinking I dropped my pacifier in the trash can, but instead sees just blood covering the left side of my face. He, obviously I, freaks the F out and calls 911. Tries to find the source of the bleeding, and he drives me to the emergency room. All he remembers was panicking and trying to call my mom, and me not crying. He said that stuck out most to him was the fact that I was sitting there looking at him like a weirdo. We get to the ER, and they rush me back only to find out I have a tiny half-centimeter cut on my eyebrow from the metal can. My dad thought I lost my eye because of all the blood. He said when he got back to the house, it looked like a murder scene because my high chair and the floor around it was covered in blood. Story 32. Another one. One morning I woke up early, made some coffee in peace, and then peeked my head in to check on my kids, who shared a room. They were about 2 and 4 at the time. 4-year-old is sound asleep. I check on the 2-year-old, and her bed is empty. I figured she had climbed in with my husband while I was having my coffee, so I went to check, and she wasn't there. At this point, I'm starting to get anxious. We have a small house, not many places she could be. Check the bathroom, living room, both bedrooms again, nothing. Run downstairs and notice the front door is unlocked. Now I'm panicked. I sprint my ass down the street, barefoot, yelling her name. She's nowhere to be found. At this point, I'm waking up my husband, ready to call the police, thinking someone straight up took my child. I run into the laundry room to grab pants to put on so I can search the neighborhood, and my toddler was laying in a pile of laundry, with her face showing, sound asleep. Little turd told me later she was trying to be sneaky. Gave me multiple gray hairs and probably took a few days off my life with that one. Story 33. I could not turn my back on my youngest, ever. Every time I did, I immediately regretted it. I was in a ShopRite with both my sons, and they were around 3 and 4. I wanted to ride in one of those dreaded car carts that have the little fake car attached to the front. So I'm pushing them along. The youngest is trying to grab things off the shelves, putting his body halfway out the car so his head is dragging on the floor, his regular antics. So I pay. I'm pushing this beast of a cart out of the store. Right outside the door, they have these metal railings to guide you out one cart at a time. This demon seed immediately takes advantage. He jumps out of the car part, grabs the front of it, and jams it into the metal bars and makes a break for the parking lot. My oldest son is now trapped inside the car cart. I'm trapped behind it. There's a line of people behind me. I try to unjam the cart. It wasn't happening. I jump over the metal guide and sprint after my youngest. A lady walking from the parking lot sees me and then sees my son trying to run past her and grabs his arm. Thank God for her. I'm frantically crying and yelling at him as I'm grabbing him. He's maniacally laughing and swinging his arms and legs to get free. I run with him in my arms over to my other son who's crying, stuck in the cart, and I'm trying to unwedge this godforsaken car cart free. This all happened in a matter of seconds, but it was a complete crap show. I never used a car cart again. fun. Story 34. 2 years ago, I went with my children, 2 and 8 at the time, to a zoo, while my wife was on a business trip. During the day, the kids played on one of the bigger playgrounds. Lots of sandboxes, slides and stuff to climb on for all ages. And I waited at the side with the children buggy. The zoo was packed with people, but by walking a few steps every now and then, I managed to keep both kids in my sight. They stayed in the little kids area. When my wife called me on the phone, I lost eye contact with the kids, and it took me a moment until I saw my daughter running towards me with an angry face. She told me that her brother pushed her and that she don't want to play with him anymore, so she left him in the sandbox. I told her to stay with the buggy and went over to find him, but to my surprise, he wasn't there. With panic starting to grow, I began searching the whole playground and calling his name. Every now and then, looking back to my daughter, still at the buggy. Some kids even started to ask me who I was searching for, when I suddenly hear a distinctive voice calling, "Papa, I'm up here." I looked up, and there he was, standing in front of a slide of the highest platform of a tower, at least 3 to 4 meters high. To get there, he had managed to climb a ladder, made from a single tree log, no railing, and walk over a suspension bridge, net with big openings. I had to climb up and then go down the slide with him, since he was scared from the height. Yeah, me too, little buddy. Story 35. 7 a.m. Saturday morning. Wife and I are laying in bed while our kids, 3-year-old female and 7-year-old male, have gotten up to watch cartoons and have cereal. I hear the front door slam closed. Get up and go downstairs. Boy is on the couch, totally engrossed in the show he's watching. "Where's your sister?" He doesn't look away from the screen. "Huh? Where's your sister?" Still no eye contact. "What? I don't know. Bathroom? Who opened the door?" "Huh? Hey!" Startled him out of his trance. "Who opened the door?" "I don't know. What door?" Head to the door and outside. No one in sight. Then suddenly, there she is, on her bike, bent down low over the handlebars, pedaling as fast as she can. Naked as the day she was born, except her helmet and pink Crocs. "Hey!" She hits the brakes hard and skids several feet to a stop. Then dumps her bike over since we took off the training wheels yesterday. "What? What are you doing?" "Riding my bike with 2 wheels," she grins. "Why are you naked?" Grin turns to confusion. "Huh? Come inside." Inside, she sincerely explains that she followed the rules and doesn't understand why I seem to be mad. She had on her helmet and shoes to ride her bike. No one ever told her she had to wear clothes. Story 36. I was on a work trip working 6 a.m. to midnight for 7 days straight. The overtime was basically going to be making $10K a week. It was out of town, so I put my wife in an Embassy Suites hotel with our 3 girls at the time, 4, 2, and 7 months, so I could at least see them at night for a bit while going to bed. She got bored and stressed living in a room with 3 children, so my mother and sister drove up and stayed with her during one of the days. One evening, my mother invited my wife to go with her to the parking lot to get something out of a vehicle. My sister, who was college age, said she could handle all 3 kids for a few minutes, no problem. They were just watching TV and snacking, and my infant was sleeping. So they go to the vehicle and come back, maybe 2 to 3 minutes later, and when they open the door, my 4-year-old is crying sitting against a wall holding her head with an injury. My 2-year-old had stripped off all her clothes and she was still spreading an oil or shampoo all over herself naked, and my 7-month-old was screaming while my sister was standing and holding her, trying to rock her and console her. They stared at my sister looking for some answers, and all she could do was just stand there and say, guys, I'm not sure what happened." Apparently, as soon as they left, my oldest started jumping on the beds and jumped too far and hit her head on a wall and started crying, which in turn woke up my youngest and made her cry, and my middle child took advantage of the situation by stripping and covering herself in a goo since she had total freedom in that span. We still laugh about it with my sister often. Story 37. Not a parent, but when my little brother was a toddler, he was just beginning to explore beyond the kiddie pool at our holiday spot. There is a little waterfall connecting the kiddie pool to the deeper pool, which my parents let him jump off with his little inflatable sleeves. My dad had just gotten us all out of the pool and wrapped in towels when he lost sight of my little brother for 1 second. Before he could even start looking around, he heard what he described as weak seal noises and instantly spotted my brother actively drowning at the bottom of the little waterfall. He had apparently decided that life-saving floaties were dumb and, with the speed only a misbehaving toddler can manage, had made his way to the waterfall and jumped off. My dad jumped in with all his clothes on, phone in his pocket and everything. Saved my little brother, lost his phone. To this day, he claims my brother owes his life to the fact that he's a noisy drowner. To finish this story on a high note, this was only one of many occasions that my brother added to both my parents going gray prematurely. Story 38. I'm a cat dad, not a human dad yet, so my story is about cats. I have 5. Last night, they're all gathering around the counter for dinner. The oldest has an ongoing issue with the 2 youngest. The 2 youngest are twins from the same litter, so they formed a pact to topple the oldest for position of alpha. The oldest is stubbornly holding on to that. The other 2 cats could not care less about the alpha stuff. Anyways, one of the twins was getting bathed by the second oldest, while the oldest was about 6 feet away from the twin, watching me prep their wet food. This twin looked to be in 7th heaven, eyes closed, laying down, etc. So I thought nothing would happen. I looked away from her, spent like 2 seconds prepping the wet food on a plate, when I hear an ungodly scream from the oldest. In that time span, the twin got out of 7th heaven, saw the oldest, stood up, ran 6 feet, and did only God knows what to the oldest to make her scream. I look over, and the oldest is swatting at the twin quite furiously. I sprayed the twin with a trigger sprayer, water, I had nearby to end the challenge stare that had also somehow ensued in that amount of time. No idea what in the world happened there. Normally the oldest just hisses, but it was a painful scream. Story 39. Last Saturday, my wife left to pick up dinner for us, so I took the kids outside for 15 minutes or so while we were waiting for her. We have a swing set in our yard with a playhouse and sliding board attached, about 5 feet off the ground. My 4-year-old daughter is up in the playhouse and suddenly starts freaking out. I walk over to the slide side where she is to see what's wrong. She says she's got a splinter. It was barely in, and I was able to pull it out with just my fingers. Right at that moment, I see out of the corner of my eye that my 2-year-old son has made his way about halfway up the ladder to the playhouse, which is on the opposite side from where I'm standing, and before I can move, he falls off the ladder and lands in a heap on the ground. Now he's freaking out. I dart over to where he is, scoop him up, and take the kids inside. He won't stand up. 4 hours in the ER later, I find out he fractured his tibia and fibula right above his ankle. Now he's in a cast for 4 weeks, all because my daughter got a splinter and I stepped away from the ladder for 1 second. Story 40. This past Christmas, I took my 3 boys to my stepmom's parents' house, and they have a big, covered pool out back, connected to their deck. You can kind of see the corner of it from the kitchen window. I've got 3 boys, 9, 7, and 4, and they were all out on the deck playing, and I was having a beer with my dad. I had the window blind up so I could see if anything happened, but you can't quite see the pool from the kitchen window. I turned around for just a second to grab another beer. When I looked back out the window, I could see that the pool cover was kind of shaking, like something made a wave in the water under the cover. So I opened the door and ran down the stairs to find that my 7-year-old had fallen in, and my 4-year-old was grabbing onto his shirt, trying to pull him out. My 9-year-old was just yelling from the sideline. This all happened over the course of maybe 20 seconds, but it felt like a few minutes. I don't think I'll ever forget the fear on my 7-year-old's face or the look of grim determination on my 4-year-old's as he tried to get his brother out of the pool. Hands down, the scariest thing that's ever happened in my adult life. Story 41. My mom looked away for a second when I was maybe 3 in a very busy Anchorage airport. I think it was the first flight over the North Pole to London. Anyway, we got separated. I looked up and the legs I was following were not my mom's legs. I got scared and ran away. I started to cry and felt so embarrassed that I went into a phone booth, the kind with a curtain and a little bench, and I sat there and cried quietly. Well, my parents freaked out, since it was the time of child kidnappings all over the news. My family worked for Western Airlines and quickly stopped every plane in the airport to have them searched. Not sure how long I was in that phone booth, but since my feet didn't touch the floor from the bench, no one knew I was there. I had fallen asleep and woke up and just started sobbing. Quietly, though. I'd get in trouble for being too loud in public. A stewardess was walking by, heard me, and found me. I'm pretty sure I delayed everyone's flights. For hours. Sorry, folks. Well, OP, if it wasn't you that delayed everyone's flights, it would have been something else. Anyone that's ever been to a busy airport knows, things just happen. So, you were just a kid. No harm, no foul. Story 42. I'm folding laundry. My almost 3-year-old is doing Play-Doh. I go to grab the stuff from the dryer. I come back and she's crying, covered in what looks like blood all over her entire face, like Carrie levels. I drop the laundry basket and I'm examining her for an injury. There's nothing that she should have been able to hurt herself on, so what the hell? Also, I'm repeating to myself that head injuries always look worse than they are, and I'm trying not to have a panic attack. Then I see it, an open ketchup bottle. It's ketchup. In 2 minutes, she figured out how to open the fridge and squeezed an entire bottle of ketchup on her head. Naturally. And it's in her eyes, and that's why she's crying and smells like french fries. Damn it. It's funny now, but at the same time, I was freaking out and was in emergency mode. That's not the best story, though. The best was my nephew, maybe 2? I was helping my sister with some volunteer work for a food bank her MIL ran, so we were all at her MIL's house. My BIL was supposed to be watching the kid, and he wanders in with a beer talking about the Laker game 5 minutes after we got started. My sis says, "Great, how does the kid like it?" Thinking they're bonding or something. BIL just looks blank. He completely spaced on watching the kid, and now no one can find him. Police are called because the house is across the street from a very busy sports field where a child was abducted a year before. A helicopter is sent out. 2 hours later, I find the kid, asleep with a packet of stolen cookies buried in a laundry basket. He got to see the police cars, and they gave him stickers, because he was scared to wake up to his mom hysterically crying. One of his first memories. The kid is 23 now, and I remind him about that all the time. Story 43. I don't have kids, but my parents have some good ones about me. My dad was at the university library with me and my baby sister. My sister needed a diaper change, and it being the 80s, he just changed her on whatever table was nearby. While he was distracted, I wandered off. My dad noticed and ran after me just in time to see me in an elevator with the door closing. Thankfully, it was just an elevator between 2 floors, so another student brought me back up to my dad's great relief. This was how I came to be a child that had a harness-type situation for when we went out. It was held on by a few belt buckle type straps. This must have given my dad a false sense of confidence since he took me and my sister Christmas shopping at a busy mall. Soon, he was just another brain-fried parent preoccupied with getting the shopping done so we could leave. My enterprising toddler self managed to use that time to escape my harness. Being a good kid, I handed my dad the harness. He, being brain-fried, just kind of accepted it without thinking. So off I went on my toddler adventure. Luckily, my dad noticed fairly soon after and was able to find me. He took great pleasure in telling me these stories when I was a bit older, but I can't imagine the fear he must have felt. Story 44. So I'll start off by saying I live in Alaska and we get a decent amount of snow every year. So anyways, here it goes. On December 17th, 2020, my whole life changed. We got about 6 inches of snow that night, and I was going to snow blow the driveway and walkway of our house. Went to go grab my snowblower and realized a bolt in the handle had broken off from me manhandling it out of my shed. Without said bolt, the handle just folds in half. So I round up my kids, daughter, 8, and my son, who just turned 2 on the 12th. I told my wife I'd be back. I'm going to run to Home Depot real quick to grab a replacement bolt. Fast forward. We get to Home Depot and I put my son in a shopping cart the proper way, feet in the leg holes, buckled him up for safety and so on. Must I remind you, this Home Depot had one mat to kick off snow from your boots in the front so you don't slip on the cement floor while inside. Must I remind you, this mat looked to be older than both my children combined. I end up pushing the cart from the entrance to the hardware aisle, which is about 20 feet from our entrance. While I'm looking at bolts, my kids were talking to each other and I'm trying to find a bolt relatively similar to the one I had. I walked maybe 5 feet away from them and asked my daughter to push the cart towards me, not knowing she didn't kick off the snow from her boots while I was putting her brother in the cart. When we got there, about 5 minutes inside, she was then standing in a puddle which formed from the melting snow from her boots. She ends up slipping and, of course, just like any normal person, she holds on to the cart to try and prevent herself from falling. She ended up pulling the shopping cart down when she fell while my son was buckled in the front, causing my son to practically fold like a lawn chair. He's screaming bloody murder while my daughter looks as if she saw a ghost, so I rush to my son, pick up the cart, all the while my son's screams were almost high enough to break a wine glass, and my daughter is freaking out. I call my wife and tell her there's been an accident, and I'm almost certain my son has broke something. I rush him to the truck in the parking lot, with him stabilized as much as I can. Meet my wife at the nearest hospital. Yes, I drove him there. It was faster than calling 911 and waiting for an ambulance. I knew something was wrong with my son just by the way he was screaming and holding his leg. We get to the ER, and I tell the nursing staff that I think my son has a broken leg. They frantically surround him, cutting off his pants, took about 10 x-rays, and determined he indeed completely snapped his right femur in half. With a child that young, they typically don't use rods and screws, so spic a cast it was. Fast forward 2 months later, my son is fully healed, running around again. Moral of the story is, what happened when I literally looked away for 1 second. Story 45. Not my kids, but a now ex-friend's kids. Was at her house one day, and I happened to turn around to see her 4-year-old son carrying his about 4-month-old little brother down the stairs. I freaked out and went to take the baby from him before he dropped him down the stairs. All the 4-year-old kept saying was, "Baby brother was crying." She wasn't very good about keeping an eye on her kids at all. Another time when I was over there, I found the 4-year-old on the kitchen counter going through the cupboards, and he laughed at me when I told him to get down. He told me, "My daddy lets me do whatever I want." This is one of the many reasons I'm not friends with them anymore. They were very neglectful of their kids. With my own kid, when she was about 2, we were at sister-in-law's house and my daughter was in a playpen in the living room. We had just walked into the kitchen to get a drink. Sister-in-law goes back in the living room and goes, "Mommy, your daughter needs you." I come flying in to find my daughter, as well as the playpen and everything in it, covered in poop. I stripped her down and brought her to the bathroom so I could clean her up in the shower, and sister-in-law brought the playpen outside to hose it down and threw everything else into the trash. The worst one with my kid was one day when she was about 3. I went to bring her a snack and found she was already chewing on something. I put out my hand and was like, "What are you eating? Spit it out." And she wouldn't open her mouth. Finally, I get her to open her mouth, and it turns out she had taken some poop out of her diaper and was eating it. Ugh. Needless to say, her hands got washed really well, and she probably got the longest and most thorough toothbrushing of her life. Okay, yeah, I was about to say, in that situation, forget washing the hands. Let's do something about, what's going on inside the mouth. I mean, can you imagine, it getting in between, tooth cracks and crevices and stuff like that? I mean, goodness gracious, if there is ever a moment to proverbially wipe your kid's mouth out with soap, that would be it. That is so nasty. Story 46. I was at my friend B's house once, letting my 5-year-old swim with her 5-year-old. She had a hot tub and would fill it partially, and the kids would sit on molded seats and splash their feet. B was just telling me a story about a mutual friend while we sat on the deck, barely a foot from the back of my daughter's head. I was watching the kids the whole time because I was nervous, even though there was only about 2 feet of water. When the story got to the punchline about the stupid thing our friend had done, I turned to face B to say, "They what?" When I turned back to the kids, my daughter's head had disappeared. I jumped up and went to the hot tub. She was laying on her back on the bottom. I bent over and jerked her up out of there by one arm. I can't believe I didn't dislocate her shoulder. She was coughing and spitting, but breathing on her own. After I made sure she was okay, I asked her what happened. She had slipped off the seat while kicking her feet around and slid to the bottom. I asked her why she didn't just stand or sit up. "I don't know." My child demonstrated several more times that she had no survival instinct that kicks in during crises. Nothing that ever made her flinch, kick, lurch, run, stand, cower, or whatever to get away when something is hurting her. We had to watch her very closely until about 7th grade when it finally kicked in. It was a relief, but I do worry if it's something heritable and she has kids of her own one day. I've never seen a child not struggle to breathe and, live. And I grew up with the only pool in the neighborhood in the 80s, so I've actually seen a lot of kids in trouble in the water. Story 47. So there are a few. I'm the kid in all of them, however. One, when we were kids, my older brother played football. This was elementary school for him. So we're watching one of his games, and he gets hit hard. To this day, one of his teeth is still effed hard. My mom turns, presumably to cover my eyes or something, and I'm gone. She looks back to the field, and I'm on it, chasing the guy down in a feral rage. 2, I've told this one before, but my mom was preparing to make blueberry waffles for breakfast. She has a container of blueberries and syrup on the counter, and left briefly to wash her hands with me sitting on the floor. She returns, and the blueberries are gone. She asks me, "Did you eat the blueberries?" And I shake my head, no. She then takes me gently by the hand and leads me to the mirror, where I can see about a quarter of my face smeared in blueberry syrup. She then asks, Are you sure? To which I respond, maybe just one. I'm not a very good liar. 3. I don't actually remember this one since I was an infant at the time, but for my brother's 5th birthday, I think, our parents took him to be on the Bozo the Clown show. It was a hoot, apparently. Anyway, we get home and we're left to our devices for just a moment, at which point my brother decides he knows how to pedal me on his feet, so we try it. Cue me hurtling into a wall immediately. Story 48. This was my mom. I'm not a parent, but I still remember it vividly. We were visiting my aunt who lived atop a pretty steep hill along a busy street. We pulled up and it was my mom, my younger brother, about 5, and me, about 7 years old. She was unloading the van and both my brother and I started running around after the long car drive. She told us to wait by the front door of the house. My aunt wasn't home yet, and we eventually started walking that way. She saw a tennis ball and kicked it towards my brother. He missed it and immediately started chasing it down the steep driveway. Being the young, dumb kid I was, I yelled for him to stop it before it rolled into the street. He dropped his backpack and started sprinting. My mom heard us and from the back of the van yelled, "Don't go into the street!" She poked her head out and saw my brother running down the driveway and started screaming like a banshee for him to stop. He either didn't hear her or was ignoring her because he was still in a full sprint. Thankfully, he tripped over himself and fell about 8 feet short of the street. I still remember it so clearly because my mom was freaking out, running towards my crying brother, and I just watched the tennis ball roll into the street as several cars drove right past it. I try not to think about it, or take responsibility, but if he didn't trip, there's a very good chance he would have been hit by a car. Story 49. Not a parent, but my folks don't use Reddit, but I figured this still belonged here. This is something my mom likes to tell me about, and we have a good laugh about it now. I was about 4 to 6 years old, and we went camping. This was in the early to mid-90s. It was dark out, and I needed to go to the bathroom. They had a shack/cabin with toilets and showers, I believe. My mom was going to come with me, but I said, no, I can do it myself, or something like that. So she relented, and I went to the bathroom by myself. Unfortunately for everyone, I must have gotten confused in the dark and forgot where my camp was. I honestly don't know because I was so young. I have no memory of this, lol. And somehow walked across the highway. Yes, the highway at night to another campsite trying to find my parents. I got lucky and some really kind woman found me wandering around her campsite and helped me find my parents. She went all around her campsite with me before walking me over the highway to our campsite, and I was reunited with my parents. Needless to say, we hadn't been camping since, lol. Oh, and there is another time in that same age range where it was high tide season, where the rivers were flowing fast. My parents were setting up camp, and the next thing they knew, I was at the river's edge. LOL. Again, we did not go camping again. Not when I kept disappearing on my folks. LOL. Story 50. My 6 and 4-year-old sons were going swimming in our pool. The 6-year-old was already in. I walked around the side of the pool for some reason. I think I was getting the net. I'm not super sure. And a second later, I heard my 6-year-old shouting the 4-year-old's name. I looked up, and that sight will always be ingrained in my head. He was trying so hard to paddle back up. He had forgotten to put his life jacket on and wait for me to help him buckle it and zip it up. I jumped over to the side of the pool, fully clothed with shoes on. I'm 5'3", so luckily the ground on that side of the pool is slightly raised, so it was easy to get in. My 6-year-old was in the way, so I yelled at him to move. I grabbed the 4-year-old and pulled him out by the ladder and patted on his back while he was coughing. I made sure he could breathe fine, and then I just held him. I told him I was so proud of him for how well he was paddling, but to never do that again. I'm very surprised he wanted to get back in. He's the type for that to scar him for a few swimming seasons. I apologized to my oldest son as well for yelling. He understood, lol, and thanked him for being such a good big brother. I also found out after getting out that I'd left my phone in my pocket, lol. Didn't even cross my mind. I just needed to get my son safe. Pool safety is very important, folks. Things could have easily turned out not fine, and I wish we had talked more with them about being safe by the pool. We had a bit, but not super in depth. Even if you think your kid knows or would have the common sense, mistakes happen. He was just so excited to get in the pool that he forgot. Story 51. I have 2 kids and a couple of stories. I found out my son was a climber when he was a little over a year. I turned to answer a phone call, pre-cell phone for me, and discovered in the time it took me to pick up and say hello, he had climbed the outside edge of our staircase to the very top edge. He was always very curious, and one day I discovered he had the manual dexterity to open the jar of Vaseline I had sitting on my nightstand. In the span of a few seconds, he opened it and applied copious amounts to his lovely curly hair. My third story involves my daughter, when she was around 2, and her love of butter. I had a stick sitting out on the kitchen counter to soften, turned to put something in the sink, turned back, and the butter was gone. My daughter had taken it and was eating it like it was a candy bar. Story 52. I was hiking with my son, who was 11 or 12, and my now ex-girlfriend, not his mom. He crossed a shallow stream hopping from rock to rock. Girlfriend and I told him to wait there until we found a safer spot for us to cross. We only had to walk about another 20 feet or so. When we crossed, he was gone. I called his cell phone and he answered, but before I could tell him to stay still, his phone died. Everyone on the trail had already started leaving, as it was only about 30 minutes before dusk, and there was about a 20-minute walk back to the parking lot. I started screaming his name, walking in the direction he went. No response. After 15 minutes, I finally heard him faintly reply to my screams. I was so relieved to hear him, but it still took a few minutes to actually see him. By the time we got back to the car, the sun had gone down and you could barely see your hand in front of your face. 5 to 10 more minutes and I doubt we would have found him. All three of us were practically in tears as we settled in the car, and he was apologizing for walking away and asked if he was in trouble. I told him the stress of being lost was punishment enough, as long as he didn't tell his mother. It would not have gone over well for either of us. And that he's never to wander away like that again. That year for his birthday, I bought him a leash backpack you'd give a toddler. We still go for hikes, and although he's almost 17 now, he knows not to wander off, even if it's a familiar trail. Story 53. Not the parent, but actually the child of the situation. We were at a family get-together back when I was roughly 9 years old. We chose to go to Disney World. Me and my little cousin, same age with me, were walking together with my aunt. We stopped at a stall to browse items, and she assumed we were watching her as the rest of the family kept walking away. We were children in front of cool items. We were not watching her. She walked away from both of us and joined the rest of the family, assuming we were just following along. Long story short, she left us at Disney World. 2 children. I ended up screaming as loud as I could for a 9-year-old child, and luckily my father was very familiar with how I sound. He came running to both of us. The whole family was already in line on a ride, and 2 kids were left alone outside. No one had a clue we were gone until my father heard my shrieking and recognized the scream. They finally looked down and noticed we'd been missing for over 10 minutes since they were already partially in the line for a new ride. Story 54. Not my kid, but friends with the family. We'd all taken a day out to the seaside, and said child had asked to play in a playground set back from the beach. There were probably 6 adults, 2 kids. Said kid was 5 years old. Anyway, we're all stood at the wall chatting when suddenly Mum says, "Where's the kid?" No one could see her. Okay, only been a second since we saw her. All swapped the saw her last info, and she had to be in the playground. But despite looking everywhere we could, she was nowhere to be found. 10 minutes go by and panic starts setting in. We can't understand where she could have gone. It was then when young boy, about 7, came and asked, "Are you looking for a little blonde girl?" Turns out she tried using a slide that comes out of a plastic castle but didn't quite fit. She was too big. Problem being, the castle is completely enclosed. Dad goes over, rescues her, and brings her, obviously upset, to Mum, who rushes over with hugs, kisses, and yelling off all at once, saying we'd looked everywhere. Kids' only response? Well, you didn't look in the castle. No lies detected. You didn't look in the castle, and leave it to a kid in a time of crisis to come up with some quick wit. Great response. Great story. Glad she's okay. Story 55. Good God, I have so many stories. Toddler was falling down the stairs with Dad's hands like a millimeter away trying to catch her. Poor guy was traumatized. Kid was fine. Different toddler tripped and fell backwards, cutting her face open on a step stool on the way down. 5 stitches and first family ER trip. More falling children, because that's just what happens. Both kids made mud on the dining table with water and the dirt from a plant pot. This one, though, is a story I told to my coworker who was trying to quell his baby fever. It was morning. I was putting in my contacts. One eye was done when my 2-year-old came over sobbing. Her hands were covered in crap. There was a trail of crap down the hall leading to where she had evidently pooped, removed her diaper and stepped in its contents, and tried to clean her own butt. I was half blind, only one contact, remember, trying to soothe this sobbing, grossed out child while I bathed her very thoroughly, then had to go clean up the horrors, also thoroughly. My coworker suddenly wasn't so sure he was ready for kids. Yeah, if you ever want to quell anyone's baby fever, just tell them a bunch of poop stories. It's bound to at least get them to think twice, right? Story 56. This didn't happen to me, but my wife/mom. I guess it still counts. My parents own a restaurant. Since my wife doesn't work, she often goes to them during lunch and helps out a little bit, or just sits there with the kids, and then has lunch with my parents. Last summer, before our son turned 3 years old, he was playing and running around the restaurant. We let him do that if there are almost no guests around in the restaurant. At one point, he asked my mom, "Where's Grandpa?" And she told him he went to go buy something. There's a small supermarket close to the restaurant, like 2 minutes to walk there. My wife was watching our 1-year-old daughter in that moment, and my mom went into the kitchen. She came out a few seconds after and saw he wasn't in the hallway. When she asked my wife if he walked into the main area, she said no. After what felt to my wife like 20 lifetimes, it was 10 minutes max, she found him coming out of that supermarket that I mentioned. He was crying because he couldn't find Grandpa, and because a worker in the shop wouldn't let him take a toy without paying. He had to cross 2 roads from the restaurant and walk through a crowded square to get to the shop, and he even went inside and took a toy all alone. My wife said she died 10 times over while looking for him everywhere outside before deciding to go and look at the supermarket. Story 57. I was in the Navy at the time, LPO for the pediatrics clinic, and our oldest son was, I want to say, a little over a year old. I was in the middle of ironing my uniform and my wife was in the shower. She yelled at me to grab her our spare bottle of shampoo, as the one in the shower was empty. I stopped what I was doing, grabbed the bottle out of the cabinet, and gave it to her in the shower. 30 seconds tops. As I handed her the bottle, I heard a blood-curdling scream from our son. I ran in and found that he had crawled over, pulled the cord on the iron, and it fell to the floor. While it was on the floor, he had placed his hand on it and burned his hand. I yelled at my wife what had happened and to get dressed and meet me in the car. I raced to the ER on base, practically driving through the security gate, and got him checked out and taken care of, and then held us in the room for an ungodly amount of time. Then they came in and were asking us very personal questions and finally implied that we had abused our son. I calmly and firmly told them that I was the LPO in the pediatrics clinic and to call my commanding officer, as he would vouch for both of us since I worked for him. He was my son's doctor and saw my son on a regular basis for checkups, etc. They finally got a hold of my commanding officer, got it all cleared up, and let us go about our business. Needless to say, it was a horrific incident and one I will never forget. Story 58. I was downstairs and just finished washing dishes when I noticed water dripping from the ceiling into the dining room. Went upstairs to see my 6-year-old stepson in his room with a bucket of soapy water, a wash rag, and the 5-foot-tall stuffed animal giraffe. He decided that the giraffe needed to be washed. At the time, he'd also decided that the shelves holding the bucket of soapy water needed washing. He didn't realize water travels down. There is an Xbox 360 on the bottom shelf. Told him we'd wait a couple days for the Xbox to dry out, then we'd see if it still worked. Then, 2 hours later, I found out that his older brother took it upon himself to have fun beating the Xbox, that I hadn't established was broken yet, with a hammer outside because, quote, "I thought you said it was broken." Story 59. My husband and I got the rare opportunity to spend some one-on-one time with one of our twins in Disney World a couple years ago. Everything was going swimmingly well, as we enjoyed peacefully roaming around Magic Kingdom. We got to watch a parade, our son got his face painted, the weather was perfect, and the crowds were thinning. It was getting late when I remembered that we hadn't used our dining meal snack credits for the day. I sent my husband off to get snacks and found a spot on the wall to rest, with the castle in the background, while I watched my little guy dance to the magical Disney music, playfully roaring at passers-by. He was painted like a lion. It was adorable, I promise. It was like something out of a Disney World commercial. A couple of minutes pass and my husband comes back with handfuls handfuls of snacks. I call my son to come play a little closer while we jumble the snacks around, trying to keep them from falling. For a brief moment, we simultaneously focused on getting the snacks opened, leaving that 1 second of time where no parental eyes were on our son, which happened to be the exact same moment that he decided to Azabenya, a live effing squirrel in Disney World, with his face painted like a lion. The squirrel scratched him up pretty bad, and on the advice of our doctor and poison control, you call them for animal exposures. Who knew? We had to bring him to the ER for a series of rabies shots, an updated tetanus, and some antibiotics. Oh, and he was covered in squirrel fur, which I inadvertently discovered an allergy to. Story 60. Laid my 6-month-old son on the bed with his father, who was asleep, to look down the hall to make sure my other 2 sons were brushing their teeth. I turned around and my 6-month-old had rolled onto his tummy and had scooted backwards to the edge of the bed so that his legs were dangling off. I didn't know he could do that. I ran to stop him falling, but I wasn't fast enough. He fell in like a cross-leg position and his head flopped onto a pillow. He cried, of course, but not very bad at all. I got everyone in bed, nursed him to sleep like normal, and thought he was fine. I chalked it up to a dumb move from a tired mom. The next day, he wouldn't put weight on that leg. I instantly took him to the Children's Hospital ER, and they confirmed that he broke his leg from the fall just above his ankle. I felt so bad. I still feel bad. We were in the ER for 9 hours total for full body scans and blood work, and they called CPS on me. What followed was a couple months of anxious hell, wondering if they thought I was a bad mom and would take him from me for being negligent. They cleared me after we saw a doctor that specializes in abuse, and she was like, "I don't know why you're here. I'm so sorry, but oh my God." Worst, I looked away for a second ever. He's almost 3 now and still has a death wish, but you'd never tell he broke a leg. Story 61. I was giving my 1-year-old daughter a bath and my wife wasn't home. I was probably on Reddit for a minute when I heard the telltale poop grunt. The next bit happened in slow motion. I looked up to see my daughter, turd in hand, arm raising, higher, mouth opening, wider, higher, wider. I was able to knock the turd out of her hand before she could eat it, but she did get a little poop on her lip. She, of course, was in hysterics, as was Dad, who has a bit of a clean hand need. This was the second time she had pooped in the tub, but the first time she tried to eat it. She's 20 months old now and does it all the time. Literally just did 5 minutes ago. I now have zero problem barehanding poop out of the tub into the toilet, but I don't like it one bit. Story 62. I'll give you 2. Wife story. 3-year-old plus daughter was toddling around looking through the storm door. Mom explicitly told her, do not open the door, as there were strong winds. Wife is talking to her, visiting her father on the couch, when daughter opens the door. The door immediately flings fully open, flat against the wall, with little Miss Van Off My Meat in tow. Somehow she held on until she passed the cement porch and landed safely on the mulch on her diapered butt. My story. I'm leaving the house with little Miss, now 5, and little Mr., 3-year-old, Van Off My Meat to meet wife. While going out the door, daughter goes down the 3 steps of the porch. I tell son, stay on the porch, don't move. As I close the door behind me, I turn around to pull the door closed. When I turn back around, I see son on his head 2 steps down, doing about a 180-degree turn, and land in the shrub next to the steps. I rush to pick him up and find a bloody nose and face. After about 40 or so craps and some doctoring, he turned out fine, other than several scabs on his face. However, daughter made sure to tell mommy that daddy said a really bad word. Story 63. Not a parent, but a sister of a fur baby. I was watching my parents' dog, Stella, while they were at a baseball game when I was about 12. My parents' backyard is pretty big for a standard house, but we had a leash that was big enough for her to move around freely without going into anyone else's backyard or the main street that was on the edge of the property. Anyway, I let her outside and put her on the leash. I set up my laptop in the kitchen, which has a huge window looking out to the backyard, so I can keep an eye on her while I played The Sims 3. I was sending my sim to her job, and as I turned around to check up on Stella, I couldn't see her. I wasn't panicking at first, since sometimes she likes to lay inside the bushes that border me and my neighbor's yard, but she wasn't there. Then I saw that the leash was cut. She was gone. I didn't know what to do. I tried calling my mom, but she didn't answer. So I went to my neighbor's house and they weren't home. I was having a panic attack. I started looking for her in the neighborhood, call out her name like that guy from A Streetcar Named Desire. Not even 10 minutes later, a woman in her minivan was talking to one of the other people who live on my street, talking about a dog that's in their backyard. They heard me yelling Stella's name and realized it was my dog in this dude's backyard. I saw her and tried to run up to her. She bolted and I started running after her with the lady in the minivan driving behind me in case I needed help. Stella ended up running all the way back home, and I found her laying in front of the porch door waiting to go back inside. I thanked minivan lady and brought her inside. I found out later that her leash was just super worn down to the point it broke. Story 64. I was the child in question, and I was probs closer to middle school aged when this happened. Some context and background. My mom is from Missouri, but we live in Maryland, and so we used to fly to Missouri at least once every couple years to visit her family. I have autism, which means changes in routine are hard, and so is communication. Okay, so actual story. We're going through the TSA check-in crap to get on the plane to Missouri. My mom goes through, then my dad, then me. My mom starts walking ahead, assuming my dad was going to stick with me. She was wrong. My dad went through and continued walking, and then poor me went through. Well, wouldn't you know, I was the lucky son of a female dog who got randomly stopped to do extra testing, like they had to swab my hands or some weird crap. There's just a couple problems with that. One, this has never happened, and I'm used to flying at this point, so I start freaking out due to autism. Two, they had to get in my personal space and touch me, also a no-no because of autism. And three, I couldn't communicate any of this because I was 2 seconds away from a major autism meltdown and was already starting to melt down. Anyways, my mom turns around because she has great mama bear instincts and wanted to make sure I was still with her and my dad. I wasn't, and then she hears me freaking out and comes back to the check-in point to me freaking out and the TSA agents, according to her, looking like I was suspicious. She had to explain to them that I had autism and this was very much not an autism-friendly thing they were trying to do. And yeah, that's how the TSA almost thought I was a terrorist or some crap. Story 65. This happened to my mom when my brother and I were 2. My brother was starting an interest with tools like hammers and screwdrivers. My mom was fixing something in the hallway, I think the bathroom door or something, and left the toolbox in the hall to grab something and left me and my brother in our room. Well, my brother found a drill and showed me what he found and messed with it. While pushing the button that caused the drill to run, he had it close to my head and it caught in my hair. Mom was coming back when she heard the drill and then heard me scream and found my brother with the drill and my hair tangled in it. She got the drill away from my brother, but a chunk of my hair was already pulled out. After that, I was scared of getting my hair brushed, and my brother wasn't allowed to touch any tools without an adult present. I have no memory of this and didn't know about it until I was 19. All I remembered is just being scared of getting my hair brushed for no apparent reason. It explained why my mom told me to pull my hair back when working with tools and telling both my brother and I to never put something like a drill close to someone's head nearly every time we work on tools. Story 66. My son, 14 months old, had just learned how to walk. While he was toddling around, he twisted awkwardly on his leg as he was going to sit down and got what is called a toddler fracture, a spiral-shaped fracture around the shin that's actually pretty common. Obviously in pain and unable to put weight on it, we took him to the doctor for x-rays. The doctor didn't want to put him in a full leg cast, so we had him in a below-the-knee cast, and he would only need it for a couple weeks. One day, he was crawling around on the floor, and I left the room for less than a minute to go pee, and when I came out, he was holding the cast in his hand. He had somehow pulled the cast off with his baby strength and was proudly showing it off to me. Needless to say, we were not happy because you can't just put the cast back on. We had to go back to the doc, who was amazed. He said he'd never seen a kid do that before to one of his casts. Casts are normally put on a little loose in case of swelling and to not cut off circulation, but no baby should be able to pull it off. Because of his shenanigans, he had to be put in a full leg cast so he couldn't do it again. He wasn't happy about that. Story 67. When my daughter was 2, we were getting ready to leave the house and it was raining. We had boots and raincoats on and I went to quickly fill the dog's water dish since we were planning to be gone for a bit. My back was turned for maybe 7 seconds. Mind you, this was an open concept apartment, so it's not even like I left the room. All of a sudden, I hear a scream/cry and my daughter has the curved handle of her toddler umbrella stuck in her mouth. The end was behind her teeth, and the curved part was back towards her throat. What the F? Adrenaline kicked in, and I was able to get the umbrella unstuck, but she was hysterical, drooling profusely, and couldn't speak normally. Long story short, she had bruised her plate and caused enough swelling to her tongue that she couldn't eat or drink, and they were worried about the swelling causing her airway to become blocked. Ended up being admitted to the hospital overnight, getting IV fluids, and were released when she was able to eat. Not trying to be a helicopter mom, but damn, kids are fast and can apparently fashion a tool of destruction out of almost anything. Story 68. I'm going to tell this story on my mother's behalf. I believe that my dad was either at work or sick, and my older brothers and myself are still around that age where we weren't helpful at making sure a 2-year-old wasn't getting into trouble. My mom had just finished changing my little brother's clothes. She set him down with my brothers and me, and then went into the kitchen to start making lunch for us. Mind you, all of us were in the living room, which is next to the kitchen. We were all playing Nintendo except my youngest brother, who, once my mom turned around, walked behind us silently. My mom peeks in, then asks where our brother is. I was very engaged with the game, but I'm pretty sure one of my brothers confirmed he was with us or just out of my mom's vision. She thought nothing of it and proceeded cooking. About 10 minutes later, we realize the front door is open. We all freak out, but when we run outside, there's our brother standing next to the sweetest police officer I've ever met. She was super nice to my mom and even helped calm her down because she was having a panic attack. My brother had walked up the street when the cop found him. Thank goodness. He's 16 years old now, and we get a good laugh out of that story now. Story 69. I'm not a parent, but I am a nanny, and most days I don't know which family I'm going to be helping out until the day of. Anyways, this family was 2 7.5-year-old boys, twins, and a 5.5-year-old. This seems easy, right? Well, normally, the parent has to disclose whether or not their child or children has or have special needs, so we can assign a nanny with special skills to take care of the children to the best of their ability. That day, I was not prepared for what I was walking into. This job was 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., so I was naturally going to already be exhausted. I walked out of the house, and the mother lets me know about how one of the twins was extremely low-functioning autistic and still wearing a diaper, easily triggered, and needs constant supervision. She also let me know that the youngest child was also autistic and needed to be fed by a feeding tube, and needed help using the bathroom, still using pull-ups. Just to be clear, this is not a post bashing autistic children. My godchildren are all some form of autistic, but all high-functioning. These children were low-functioning. Anyways, the youngest child wanted to go outside and play in the grass. Pretty easy, right? I helped him sit down and get settled in a not wet part in the grass. I walked back in the house. I was gone maybe 2 minutes, and the eldest autistic child was sitting on the counter. An entire bag of sugar spilled all over him, the counter, the sink, the floor, you name it. His hand was in the remaining sugar left in the bottom of the bag. For context, I left this child downstairs and playing with his cars on his bed, and he managed to run upstairs and into the kitchen without me noticing. In the 2 minutes I was outside. I was not a happy camper, but it gave me a deeper appreciation and understanding into the minds of those whose brains don't work on the same wavelength as mine. He wasn't trying to be manipulative, he just wanted something sweet to eat. Story 70. We had just moved into a new home. My son was 3 at the time. At the time, the whole street was pretty much a retired community. They had all bought their homes in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, raised children, and all grew old there. We were the first family with younger kids in over 30 plus years. The reason I'm saying that is because we had never dealt with solicitors or people knocking on our door prior to living there. I guess I should say solicitors were very few and very far between, so we haven't established a protocol if someone were to stop by unexpectedly. I had my morning coffee and number 2 was knocking on my door. I sit down on the toilet and I'm mid-push, and I hear a knock. My son is one of those naked/underwear kids, but in this particular moment, he was Porky Pigging it. Business on top, nothing on bottom. He was completely naked from the hips down. Once I hear the knock, I know my son is moving towards the door. I desperately yell at my son to not open the door. My son outsmarted child locks at the age of 1.5 years. Nothing could contain this kid, but I digress. After the 3rd time of yelling, and I hear no response from him, even though I'm still halfway through a constipated push session, I regrettably have to leave the toilet half finished and unable to wipe because I'm worried my son is now halfway down the block. I turn the corner and see that not only is the front door wide open, there's also a 55-year-old man standing in my doorway, but also my half-naked son standing there, and their eyes are locked, not saying anything, just staring into each other's eyes. My life flashes before my eyes because not only do I have to talk to this stranger, while also desperately trying to get my half-naked small child out of direct eyesight, I also have a turd halfway poking out. Any normal person would have bowed out, but this guy still gives me his long-winded sales pitch. It was not a highlight, and it still gives me anxiety thinking about it. LOL. Story 71. My middle son was 4. We were at the Chesapeake Bay at a little beach area. I was with my almost 2-year-old by the water, and the bigger kids, 4 to 6 years old, were playing soccer with dad/uncles. They finished the game, and I don't see my 4-year-old. I ask my husband, and he's like, oh, he's right here. But he wasn't. All the adults scatter. My mom to check the bathrooms, my sister to the parking lot just in case. My dad is talking to the lifeguards. I had left down the beach, and my brother heads in the other direction. I search to the end of the beach and I can't find him. Although I'm feeling panic at the edges of my throat, I tell myself, when I get back to our spot, they'll have found him. I get back, and the only adult in sight watching the other kids is my brother-in-law, and he just kind of looks at me and shakes his head. At that point, I lost it. I couldn't think straight or really breathe. All I could think is, great, my son is lost or drowned or kidnapped, and I'm just standing here like an idiot. About 30 seconds later, my husband comes back with my son. He had followed one of those dune buggy/ATV things the lifeguards drive a half-mile down the beach. He said he tried to keep up with it, so he must have been running, and he just kept following the tracks. Even though we told him, oh my gosh, you were lost, how would you have made your way back to us? To this day, he insists he wasn't lost, and when he got tired, he was planning to turn around and follow the tracks back to us. Story 72. Most of these stories are scary situations, so I'll share a funny one. I'm a parent now, but this was floored over 20 years ago when I was about 15 and babysitting. I was watching 2 sisters, a 2 to 3-year-old and a 5 to 6-year-old. The poor 5-year-old had just had surgery involving her digestive system. I can't remember what exactly and didn't entirely understand it as a kid. And she had to pee a lot and it was causing her pain. So she was in the bathroom a lot and due to the pain wanted me there with her. So anyway, at one point she was in there for a while and I was doing my best to juggle keeping eyes on both kids. But boy, that toddler was a hellraiser, LMAO. She was cute as hell, but fearless, energetic, and adventurous, LOL. She wouldn't sit with us, so I kept running back and forth from the bathroom to the kitchen where the toddler had gone. I discovered her with a box of mini donuts she'd snatched off the table, so I put them far back on a tall counter. Came back again, and she had moved the big bar stool type chair all by herself and climbed up and got them. So I took them again and put them in a cabinet and put the bar stool back, and she's just laughing away at all of this. I went back to the older sister, come back again to the toddler, and there she is standing on the damn counter. She heard me coming and looked over her shoulder at me and giggled and turned back to what she was doing. I walked over to her and there she was, the box of donuts open and one bite taken out of each one. Ha 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 ha. And I swear to God she licked her finger and started dabbing up the crumbs while grinning and giggling. I couldn't even be mad. It was so funny. My daughter is 3 and a clingy little snowflake. She's had far fewer turn my back for a minute shenanigans. Story 73. Kids are terrible at knowing that safe objects can sometimes be not effing safe at all. I remember playing in the snow with some kids from next door who were a few years younger than me. As a nearly teenager, I had used my dad's mighty shovel for moving snow off the drive to build a snowman. Sneaky, sneaky, Dad. My friend, Bill, comes around with his little sister, Ted, and it turns into a snowball fight. I take a great armful of snow, and being a foot taller than Bill, I drop it on him. We all laugh. I turn to gather another armful, turn back around, and drop it in horror. Bill is facing me, oblivious and confused as to why I'm frozen. His little sister, Ted, is standing behind him with a pile of snow. Somehow, she's got as far as suspending a very heavy metal shovel loaded with snow a few inches over his head. And reading her face, she's losing the fight with it. This isn't one of those stories where quick thinking saves the day, torn between telling Bill about what was over him and telling Ted to move the shovel from over his head in as few words as possible, and actually trying to help. I basically managed to do nothing. Ted collapses under the combined and significant weight of shovel and snow, smashes Bill over the head with both, who falls to the floor bleeding from the head, and then starts to cry. In the space of about 3 seconds, I've gone from a lively snowball fight to standing over the fallen bodies of 2 children in the blood-stained snow like some unholy combination of Bugsy and Fargo. Both were fine. My parents knew well enough to make sure Bill wasn't concussed. I didn't get to use the shovel again for a couple years, and my neighbors politely declined to come and visit again. Story 74. The Thanksgiving when my kid was almost 18 months old. I was sitting on the floor with her and chatting with my now ex-mother-in-law, and my kid bolted into the kitchen. I shouted, "Hey, someone grab her!" into the kitchen because I couldn't stand up fast enough. There were several adults in the kitchen prepping the meal. Someone had left the oven wide open and turned away from it, and of course, my kid runs up and puts her palm flat on the inside of the oven door. Time slowed down. No one was listening. I couldn't get there to save her. I was screaming for help, and then she started screaming when the searing pain kicked in. Someone finally heard her and snatched her away. She's howling, I'm freaking out, and the skin on her palm and fingers has already risen to enormous red blisters. Almost everyone is standing there dumbfounded. My ex-brother-in-law is trying to help by putting her hand into cold water from the faucet. Someone put a white towel around her hand, but it was an old one and kind of shredded. So when I caught a glimpse of it, it looked like her skin was peeling off her hand, which of course scared me to death until I saw it was just towel threads. While I'm crying and she's screaming, I'm trying to figure out what to do since we're in the middle of nowhere. No urgent care, just a tiny, crappy rural hospital. No burn cream in the house, no bandages, but it's clearly not a burn you can just throw aloe on and be done with it. The blisters were huge, like giant white pearls attached to my baby's hand. I'm already worried about it being deep and causing nerve damage. In the middle of this, the food was ready, and my ex's crazy aunt had the audacity to stroll over, get in my face, and say, "Shh, you need to be quiet. They're about to say the prayer so we can eat," in the other room. The other crazy aunt announced that I obviously, quote, need to be medicated. So at this point, I'm crying and upset and furious. My ex and I head out the door to run her to the tiny local ER, where they lanced her blisters and bandaged her hand. They sent us home with a huge tub of burn cream and some instructions. We were there for less than an hour. By the time we get back to the house, there was almost no food left. No meat, and only a few portions of the side dishes that weren't scraped clean. No one set aside plates of food for us. We were starving. Almost no one gave a crap that a toddler had a deep burn on her hand. I'm so glad I'm divorced from that family now. Kiddo's just fine. No permanent damage. For the record, that was the second time I had missed Thanksgiving dinner. The previous year, I had to go breastfeed my baby and they decided to eat without me, which was fine. I didn't want to hold them up. No one set aside food for me, and when I put my baby down, there wasn't any meat left and only a few scrapings of side dishes. Story 75. My 5-year-old has been an absolute angel since day one. She's never even wet the bed. Can count on one hand the amount of time she's had a tantrum, and even those were tame. Of course, as first-time parents, we assumed all children were like this, especially as we were the first in our friend group to have a kid, and neither me nor my wife had younger siblings or cousins. When she was born, it was probably the first time ever that I held a baby. Very surreal. That assumption led us to agree to watching our friend's toddler last year, as the father was being sent home from working on the other side of the country after testing positive for COVID, only for 2 nights while they made some other arrangements. We knew he wasn't the most well-behaved kid on the planet, but we decided we could handle it. Literally 10 minutes after he arrived, I was in the kitchen making the kids a snack and heard a thud. My wife turned her back for 5 seconds, and the kid had ran headfirst at full speed into my wife, knocking her over into the fish tank, which smashed. While I was busy cleaning that mess up, my wife was watching the kids upstairs. The devil child needed only the slightest opportunity to drop his pants and do a crap on my daughter's new frozen duvet. He went home again not long after. Cute kid. Story 76. It wasn't a look away. I was looking, but it was 1 second. When my daughter was 2, we were playing around in the kitchen that was missing the table because we had just bought a new one and I hadn't yet put it together. So here we were spinning around and having fun getting dizzy. So after a good spin, I sat her down and steadied her on her feet. She stumbled, walked for a second, and then just took off. Even my dad reflexes weren't enough to catch her before she ran smack into a diving wall. It's about 6 inches wide, and she put up her hands to catch her, but one arm went to one side and the other to the left, and she caught the wall with her 2 front teeth. She turned around screaming with blood running down her chin. Her 2 front teeth we worked on so hard with grumpiness, now gone. I got her in the car seat as fast as I could and rushed her to the ER where they had to x-ray because I couldn't find one of the teeth and there was a chance she aspirated it. Before I left, though, I had the presence of mind to wipe up the blood on the floor so my wife wouldn't walk in on that nightmare. It was an accident, but it was a low point so far in my fatherhood, and despite the fact that most other injuries came on my wife's watch, this one came on mine, and it was a biggie. She's 10 now, and the teeth have grown back, but damn if she wasn't extra cute all those years. Story 77. My son was 2 years old. We were living in a trailer at the time. Kitchen/living room in front, all bedrooms in the back. I was sorting laundry in the back master bedroom. Okay, yes, more than a second, about 4 minutes. I come out the hall to see my son sitting on the couch watching a growing fire on the stove. He had put about 10 paper books, coloring books, and my effing purse on the stove and turned on all the burners. I drop everything, run him outside into the yard, and go back inside to try and deal with the situation. I started bailing water on the fire from the sink and noticed the cupboard above the stove has caught too. No vent hood. So I throw the hot stove in the hallway and start throwing water on the roof. I can't see by this point. I realize I'm losing the ability to breathe and make my way outside to the neighbors. I lived in a small town at the time that was serviced by a volunteer fire department. I call 911, they send out the page to the volunteers. 5 minutes go by. I call 911 again, saying I can see the damn fire department building and no one is coming. I run back inside my house and shut all the doors and windows and try to do more firefighting, all to no avail. Come out, call 911 again, and the operator is sick of hearing from me now and is super dismissive. My neighbor knows a volunteer firefighter and ends up driving to his workplace, telling him there's a goddamn fire. No one got the page. About 20 minutes after it began, we finally have a fire truck on scene. We lost everything. I could not talk properly for about 1 month after the fire and have had severe breathing problems ever since. My son is 12 now and is fully aware he burned the whole house to the ground. I renamed the Against Me song that had just came out to I Was a Toddler Anarchist in his honor and still sing it that way to this day. So I just want to say, as a Los Angeles resident myself, obviously we've had some horrible tragedies recently and damage and devastation with fires. This one really hit home, so OP, I totally get it. Glad you're okay, glad the kid was okay, and that you've moved on from it, but just wanted to spotlight that for a second. Story 78. My son was around 9 months and learning how to walk. His first tooth was also coming in. That day, he was using a tall laundry to hold himself up. I got a text message and looked away for a second before he fell. I go over to pick him back up and notice some blood on his chin. His tooth was out a little more than it was before. I poked it and it wiggled. I was terrified of him swallowing it, so we took him to the children's hospital. We were sent to the children's dentist and was waiting for an x-ray when I saw it was missing. It had fallen out on the floor. It was also winter with bits of salt on the carpets, but we actually ended up finding it. They continued with the x-ray to make sure it was a clean break. Apparently, when a tooth is coming in, there's no root. It's quite common. So there he was again at 9 months and toothless again. His adult will come in when he's older, but he has a gap and his teeth are shifting. We figured that the kids would need braces anyway, but his might be sooner. He's turning 3 next month and has trouble with some sounds, but it's too early to do anything. Also, that incident sent me into a downward spiral of worse anxiety and depression. I'm medicated now, but God, that incident still instills anxiety. Story 79. I had several of these stories as a kid. As a toddler at a hospital, and I snuck onto the elevator. Orderlies found me in the morgue. At 2, my dad was working on the roof while my mom was gardening. She turned her back for a second and I was halfway up the ladder. Terrifying as they both tried to negotiate me staying still while my mom snuck up the back to grab me. Was an infant when dad was watching me and I somehow fell out the open front window. Landed on the bushes though, so all was good. Final and favorite. We were moving when I was 3. Family was packing the back of the pickup while me and the neighbor boy, 2, were sitting in the front seat of the truck. I know how to drive this, I said smugly. You pull this thing back, but I can't do it. Neighbor boy says, I can. We managed to get the car in neutral, and it rolled backwards down the driveway and hit my uncle's car that was parked across the street as he helped us move. No one was injured and nothing was damaged, but I felt so awful because I knew neighbor boy would get in trouble even though I didn't. May have contributed to my guilt complex. Story 80. While I'm not a parent, during my teen years I regularly looked after my neighbor's kids, 4 and 7, as she left for work. They were both bright and cheery kids, but their energy seemed endless. How I managed to get them to go to sleep still confuses me to this day. One day, as their mother left for date night, I was in charge of them for a night. Nothing out of the ordinary except for the fact that the landlord came to install their new gas stove as the conduction stove went kaput earlier. I couldn't help but smile as they asked away at the landlord countless questions about the installation and the features of the new stove. After the installation, dinner was to be made. The kids' eyes practically sparkled at the sight of the flames when the landlord connected the fuel and tested it. This is where I looked away for a second as I went to inform their mother that the installation was a success. 4 let out a wail which made me drop the phone and come running to them. 7 had apparently asked the landlord if the fire was blue for a reason, and rather than be honest, he told them it was colder than orange flames. 7 probably used 4 as a guinea pig to test his newfound knowledge with less than optimal success. I guess she got laid that night, since when she arrived home, she sounded less worried than when she did on the phone when I told her about 4's finger. Story 81. I was at a festival with my 2-year-old and 4-year-old. There was a long line for ice cream, so my kids started playing in a bubble machine that was about 10 feet away. Then they scooched over to a drawing table that was about 20 feet away, but was still in direct line of sight, so I was fine with it. But my 4-year-old started walking even further, and I knew this was becoming a bad idea, so I got out of line. I walked past my 2-year-old, who was still drawing, to grab the 4-year-old. When we turned around, the 2-year-old was gone. I scanned the drawing tables, the bubble machines, the ice cream line, and she was just gone. This place was packed, and I feared she might have wandered into the crowd, but some instinct kicked in, and I made a guess that she would have gone back to the previous place we were, which was in the exact opposite direction. I did find her in that direction, completely lost, looking for us. It was probably about 2 minutes that I couldn't see her, and she was never more than 50 feet from me, but it was terrifying. Story 82. I went to the bathroom while my 2-ish-year-old was playing in the playroom. It was brief. The house was baby-proofed. When I got out, I put her in her high chair and went to grab some yogurt. When I got back, I noticed her head was bobbing and something wasn't right. I took her out and put her down, and she couldn't walk, just falling over and over. Panicked, I ran around the house looking for anything external that could have caused this. In the dining room, in the corner of the wall, I found a full bottle of adult cough syrup spilled all over the floor and chair. It turned out that my sister, who had been over and left her purse in the dining room table, had had the bottle, childproof cap intact, in her purse. In the brief moments I went to the bathroom, this child climbed onto the chair, onto the table, into the purse, got the bottle, got through the childproof cap, drank the syrup, got down with the bottle, and left it to spill in the counter. There was none on her outfit or mouth. I grabbed the bottle and the baby went to the ER, running with her limp body in my hands and yelling, "Help! Help!" They had to monitor her acetaminophen levels and draw blood several times. She got a catheter, lots of screaming. In the end, her levels dropped before ever getting dangerous, and the stuff that makes you loopy wore off as well. It was super traumatic, and from that day on, I was hyper vigilant of any and all medicines or harmful chemicals. Lots of panicked moments when I'd check and double check for the rest of the toddler years. They're seriously and truly amazing, speedy little spider monkeys. I'm lucky in that CPS was not called or involved, which has happened to moms I consider better than me for things such as breaking a leg on the playground. That was our one and only injury/hospital visit, and she's almost 6 now. Story 83. My daughter was about 4 or 5 months old, still in a car seat that you could detach and carry around with you. The car seat had a curved rail on the bottom, so you could rock your baby in it when you placed it on the ground. My wife and I were leaving the house and we were in a rush. I placed the car seat on the front porch to lock the door, and just then she spits up on her onesie. I ripped it off right there on the front porch, summertime, while my wife ran inside to get a new one. Here's where it goes south. In the 2 seconds that she was unstrapped from the car seat, so I could get the onesie off and throw it to my wife in the house, and while I wasn't looking directly at her, she managed to rock the car seat enough that she launched herself out of it. I caught her upside down by the ankle just before she slid down the concrete steps on her face. My wife saw it happen, and we were both in shock. We started laughing hysterically, not because it was funny, but because, well, shock is weird. Story 84. This happened yesterday. My 6-year-old with ASD is very quiet and sneaky, also obsessed with our cats. He's also pretty small and skinny. He figured out that he can climb the shelving in the basement to get into the cat tunnel, a hole cut out to allow piping/ductwork to the master bathroom that's over a crawl space that the cats broke through the screen from to get outside. My partner found our son outside the house and brought him in, realizing that he'd gotten out without opening any doors. Kid beelines to the basement ahead of partner, who's frantically explaining the situation to me. We both go downstairs and the kid is gone. Holy F. Immediately start calling his name. Nothing. I get shoes and a jacket on and start looking outside, screaming his name. Next door neighbors come out, start searching with us. I tell my partner to double check around the house. 10 to 15 minutes later, after walking several blocks screaming his name, I go back to the house to grab the car and figure it's about time to get police involved when I see my partner and son standing on the porch. I didn't have my phone. Little Punk apparently ran into his room instead of downstairs and hid in his tent thinking it was a game. Story 85. When I was about 5 or 6, I was home alone with my dad. I think my mom had taken my brother somewhere with her, and with no older or younger brother to bother, I was hanging out with Dad while he worked out. This being the early 90s, we had a basic metal bench press setup, the kind that you could adjust the height by pulling a pin and moving it up and down. Well, wanting to be cool and buff like Dad, I wanted to lower the height so I could do press-ups too. In the time it took my dad to put down the weights he was holding, I'd pulled the pin and dropped the bar, while my little finger was still pressed up against it. I managed to slice my fingertip open when the bar immediately fell and my finger came between it and the sides of the frame it was sitting in. My poor dad, who's never been the best judge of injuries, rinsed the finger and wrapped it in a towel before sitting with me outside on the porch to wait for my mom to get home. She came back a few minutes after to Dad holding my bloody towel hand up in the air and me in tears and determined that I didn't need stitches. Got a lovely scar though. I've had a crescent-shaped bump on my fingertip ever since where the scar tissue built up and over. Also, had blood-stained carpet on the basement stairs for another few years after until they redid them, from Dad sprinting with me to the bathroom to see how bad it was. I don't know why. This is, kind of funny. Like, Dad's just like, dude, this is above my pay grade. I mean, we're just going to wrap this finger up and wait for Mom to get home. That's just such a dad thing to do. But good story. Story 86. Was on an elevator in the hospital going to see my new baby brother. It was my dad and my older brother and timid, easily spooked, on the spectrum, me. On the way, a lady who I think worked in the laundry got into the elevator and stood between me and my family. I think she worked in the laundry because she was carrying one of those multiple coat hangers that looks more than a little like a dangerously large multi-legged insect. I didn't know her, and I didn't know what that thing was, and I was 4, and I got scared. But because I'm on the spectrum, scared means freeze. Dad and Big Bro got off at the floor we were supposed to, but I couldn't figure out how to get around that lady and her coat hanger, so I didn't move. Just watched the door close and had no idea what to do next. 100% sure Dad assumed I'd gotten off with him and Big Bro, and I can only imagine the panic when he turned around and I wasn't there. I can't even remember how Dad found me, because I eventually got out of the elevator at a random floor, but I think I had the sense to stay close to the elevator and he eventually tracked me down. The big thing I remember about that whole incident is the lady in her multi-shirt hanger. Story 87. We went on vacation with our 16-month-old toddler. We were on the 3rd floor, and we had already determined that we couldn't use our balcony as the slats were wide enough that she could slip through, and the same was true of all the railings. My husband had picked up some food, and we were eating in the room. The front door and balcony door were closed/locked. Bathroom door closed. Nothing dangerous was accessible. We sat on the beds and ate as she toddled about the room and around the corner where the closed closet was. She didn't come back, so I got up to look. The motel door, not visible from the beds, was open and she was gone. I ran down the walkway to the left and my husband ran to the right. I had to force myself to look over the railings to the ground 3 floors below to make sure she wasn't there. The units were staggered to the degree that we couldn't see very far in either direction. Maids were working in various rooms and I could imagine her toddling in behind a maid and not being noticed. Fortunately, my husband found her running as fast as she could, giggling down the walkway that went to the right. How did she get out? My husband thought he must not have shut the door properly, but when we went back to our room with her, knees trembling and hearts racing, she showed us herself. The doorknob was a lever style and was much lower than any knobs we had at home. She could reach the lever and pull it down, and the door would just pop open. We used extra locks on the door after that, and I've warned my parents of this danger. Story 88. My brother and I are 7 years apart. He was 2-ish and I was 8 or 9. At some point, he had gotten up to the phone on my dad's bedside table, taken the phone off the receiver, and pushed the 911 speed dial button. He then left the phone off the hook. Mom comes upstairs to get him for lunch. He's being a pain in the high chair. My mom's had a long day. She's got curlers in her hair and doesn't want to deal with anything. We hear the doorbell ring. My mom glances towards the door. We have one of those long, thin windows next to the door, and she sees a uniform. She thinks it's a salesman, so she asks me to go tell them she's busy and can't answer the door. I go over and open the door, and a cop is standing there. Conversation goes like this. Hi, honey. Is your mommy home? No, sir. She's busy and can't come to the door. Sweetheart, I really need to talk to your mommy. No, she's busy and wants you to go away. Starts to close the door. At this point, my mom notices the commotion and storms over to the door. When she sees the cop, she freaks out. That's when we found out a quiet call had been sent from the house. Meanwhile, my brother just gleefully continued eating his Cheerios. Story 89. I was skiing with my extended family and guiding a group of them down a blue square route I had tested for them. I was at the front going down the hill and stopped and turned around to wave to everyone. They had to take the exit on the right to keep on the blue square and not go down a black diamond. I waited until I saw the whole party making the turn and then looked down for 1 second to push off and race to the front of the pack when I hear two little skiers go shooting past the exit and down towards the black diamond slopes. My little bro, 7 years old, and cousin, 6 years old, didn't turn enough, missed the exit, and were gaining more speed. I was the only one in the group that was uphill enough on the exit to go after them, so I pushed off, got into a bullet position, and didn't do a single thing to slow down. I went so fast that I got airtime on nearly every change in slope. The kids didn't know how to stop on such a steep slope, trying to pizza slice, but it was just too steep, and it was about to get much, much steeper. My little brother got the short end because he was closest to me when I caught up, and I had to push him over on his side at a high speed so he would wipe out and stop. For my cousin, I cut in front, turned backwards, and flared to catch her before she went down the fast approaching black diamond. My uncle joined us, and I instructed them all in how to parallel their skis to the slope and tilt them to slowly slide down. Kids stayed in the middle of the pack from then on. Story 90. Not the parent, but the child. This is how the story was told to me. Back out now if you're a bit squeamish. When I was a few months old, maybe 6 or 7 months, I would play with the plastic clothes pegs while Mum sorted out the laundry. Mum thought it was good for my development since I sorted them into different groups according to color. One day, I'm playing away with the brightly colored toys, pegs, when, as toddlers do, I tried to stand up. As toddlers do, I fell over. It's all part of learning balance and coordination, except I was still holding one of those clothes pegs in my fist. I fell forwards, onto the peg. I screamed. Mum turned around to see her only child with a bloody face and a plastic clothes peg in his eye. Somehow I managed to avoid damage to the actual eyeball, but I did plenty of damage behind it. Not only had I given myself a squint, which despite several surgeries, you can still see today when I'm tired, but I had managed to sever the optic nerve behind my right eye, blinded in an instant. Fortunately for me, I have no memory of this, even 50-something years on. I have no close-up depth perception. Story 91. My child is a runner, and when I say she's a runner, I don't just mean she's willing to run. I mean that at 2 years old, I get sweaty chasing her because she's so damn fast. She takes off and she's just gone. Her stride is unnatural. Her stance is perfect. Everything you learn in track or cross country, she does naturally. And the result is that this little 2-year-old girl can be halfway down the block before you even notice she's gone. And it's not just on foot. The oldest was allowed to scoot on the sidewalk by his age, but not the 2-year-old. I have to full-on sprint, knees up and arms churning to keep up with her on a scooter, and it's just not safe. So since I apparently have the even though he's not dead reincarnation of Usain Bolt, I always have to keep an eye on her, but I've several times seen her take off, reach a fence before I can, and start to climb, which she also does quickly. Basically, living with her is like living with a lightning bolt of imminent, unstoppable destruction. It's great.